What if I told you I could take any student in this room and guarantee they'd fail? Professor Thompson stood at the front of the classroom, his arms crossed and his gaze sharp, as he surveyed the group of students in front of him. His words hung in the air like a challenge, daring someone to respond. There was a palpable tension in the room, the kind that you could cut with a knife. Marcus Johnson, seated at the back of the classroom, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His eyes flicked nervously to the floor. He was used to being underestimated, especially at school. At 16 years old, he'd spent most of his life fighting the belief that he wasn't good enough. It had been his reality for as long as he could remember. It wasn't just the kids at school. It was his teachers, too. And Professor Thompson, well, he was the worst of them all. Marcus Johnson, Professor Thompson's voice broke through the tension, sending a chill down Marcus's spine. He had been hoping to avoid attention today, to blend in. But no such luck. I'll bet you that you'll fail this semester. The words hit Marcus like a slap in the face. The professor's voice was calm, cold, almost mechanical as he continued. I'm willing to stake my reputation on it. You won't last through my class, and I guarantee you won't pass the final. Gasps rippled through the classroom. Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. The students around him started to murmur. It was the first day of the semester, and already, Professor Thompson had marked him for failure. Marcus knew he wasn't like the other students in the room. He wasn't rich. He didn't have access to fancy tutoring or private lessons. He lived in a neighborhood where the odds of success were stacked against him. And yet, despite all of that, there was something inside him that refused to let go of the dream that one day he'd rise above all of it. But now, with the professor's words hanging over him, that dream felt further away than ever. The classroom settled into an uncomfortable silence, with all eyes on Marcus. His heart raced. He could feel the weight of their judgment, the expectations. And worse, he could feel the weight of his own doubt pressing down on him. He could feel it, the familiar sting of failure creeping in. Professor, that's not fair. Jamal's voice broke through the silence. He was Marcus's best friend, a loyal ally who always had his back. It's not about fairness, Jamal. Professor Thompson's voice grew harsher. It's about ability. And I'm willing to bet that Marcus doesn't have the ability to succeed in my class. Marcus didn't know what to say. He wanted to stand up and tell the professor that he was wrong, that he wasn't a failure. But the truth was, deep down, Marcus wasn't sure anymore. His grades had never been great. He could never seem to catch a break. And when he did try, it felt like no one really believed in him, especially not the people who were supposed to help him succeed. Why don't you take me up on it, Marcus? Professor Thompson said, leaning forward, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. We'll see how long you last. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, but it barely registered. Marcus could feel his legs shaking as he stood up from his seat. Jamal clapped him on the back. Don't listen to him, man. He's just trying to mess with you. Marcus nodded, but the words didn't bring comfort. Jamal had always been the optimistic one, the one who saw the good in everything. But Marcus knew better than to believe in something just because it sounded nice. Life didn't work that way. Life wasn't fair, and people like him didn't get chances. As they walked out of the classroom, Jamal kept talking, trying to lighten the mood. But Marcus's mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the professor's words. They echoed in his head with each step. You won't last. You'll fail. His life felt like a broken record, stuck on repeat. No matter how hard he tried, no matter how much effort he put in, failure always seemed to catch up with him. Marcus didn't like to think about it, but when he was alone, late at night, lying in his small bed in his cramped apartment, those thoughts crept in. The doubt. The fear. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, the world was right about him. That maybe he wasn't good enough. It was a familiar feeling, and he hated it. That night, as Marcus sat at the kitchen table, trying to do his homework, the weight of the day's events still pressed down on him. His mom was working the night shift, as usual, and the apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of traffic outside. Marcus picked up his pen and stared at the textbook in front of him, his eyes glazing over. The words on the page didn't make sense. He tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting back to the bet. He could hear Professor Thompson's voice again, like a cruel whisper in his ear. "You'll fail." But what if he didn't? What if, for once, he proved everyone wrong? Marcus closed the textbook with a soft thud and stood up, pacing the small room. He didn't want to fail. He couldn't afford to. Not for himself, and certainly not for his mom, who worked so hard to keep their lives afloat. But the question lingered, could he really do it? Could he really beat the odds? For a moment, Marcus just stood there, staring out the window at the lights of the city in the distance. The world seemed so big and so overwhelming. But then, something inside him shifted. Something deep down told him that this wasn't the end. He wasn't going to let one professor, or one bet, define who he was. With a deep breath, Marcus sat back down at the table. The doubt was still there, lingering in the corners of his mind, but he pushed it aside. He wasn't going to quit. Not now. Not ever. He would show them all. As the days passed, Marcus's determination grew. Every day, he faced the challenge of proving not just Professor Thompson wrong, but proving to himself that he was capable of achieving something more. It wasn't just about the bet anymore. It was about something deeper. It was about his future. It was about his worth. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus began to feel a spark of hope. "Maybe I can do this," he whispered to himself as he picked up his pen and started to write. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days that followed felt like a constant battle, each one pushing Marcus further into the trenches. The professor's bet loomed over him like a dark cloud, casting a shadow on every test, every lecture, every attempt to succeed. But as much as Marcus tried to brush it off, he couldn't shake the feeling that every step he took was under scrutiny. Every answer he gave in class seemed to be scrutinized, and every mistake felt magnified. It was the second week of the semester, and already, Marcus felt himself sinking. The assignments piled up, the readings grew longer, and the lectures felt more and more like foreign languages. Sitting in the middle of the classroom on that Tuesday afternoon, Marcus could barely keep his eyes open. The words on the whiteboard blurred before him. It was advanced algebra, a subject that he had always struggled with, but never felt completely lost in. But here, under the cold glare of Professor Thompson's sharp eyes, it felt like everything was crumbling. Marcus wasn't dumb. He knew he had the potential. But when your life is a series of uphill battles, it's hard to find the strength to climb every time you fall. His classmates around him seemed to breeze through the work, their heads down, scribbling away like it was second nature. Meanwhile, Marcus was stuck, staring at the equation in front of him, feeling the weight of every failure he had ever faced. "Marcus," Professor Thompson's voice rang out like a slap to the face. "You look like you're not even trying. Care to share with the class how you plan to fail this time?" The room froze. Every student turned to look at him, their eyes flicking from him to the professor. Marcus could feel the blood rush to his face, hot and angry. He didn't know how to respond. His brain felt numb, his thoughts jumbled. It was all too much. The pressure. The expectation. The judgment. "Marcus?" The professor pressed, his tone dripping with condescension. Marcus swallowed hard, doing his best to force out some words. I'm just thinking through it," he muttered, feeling his throat tighten. The room seemed to shrink around him as he tried to focus. Professor Thompson scoffed. "Well, perhaps you should try thinking harder." His voice was sharp, dismissive. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, but Marcus didn't move. He stayed frozen in his seat, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. His mind raced, thoughts colliding in a chaotic swirl of frustration and doubt. As the students filed out, Marcus remained in place, watching them go. "Hey, man, you alright?" Jamal's voice brought him back to reality. Marcus didn't answer right away. Jamal was standing there, one hand on the desk, looking at him with concern. Jamal was always the optimist, always the one who believed in Marcus when no one else did. But even Jamal couldn't make the weight of the professor's words disappear. "Yeah," Marcus muttered, shaking his head. "Just tired." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "Tired of what?" "You've been studying, right?" "Yeah," Marcus trailed off. It's harder than I thought. I thought I could do this, Jamal. But every time I think I'm getting it, it feels like I'm falling behind." Jamal leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Look, don't listen to Thompson. He's just messing with you. You're smarter than he gives you credit for." Marcus wanted to believe that. He really did. But in the back of his mind, a voice kept whispering that maybe Jamal was just trying to make him feel better. What if the professor was right? What if Marcus just wasn't cut out for this? The doubts gnawed at him. He had spent his entire life proving people wrong, fighting for scraps of respect and recognition. And now, here he was, staring at a mountain he didn't know how to climb. Jamal must have sensed his internal battle because he clapped Marcus on the back with a grin. "Come on, let's hit the library after school. We'll study together. I know you can do this, bro." Marcus hesitated. But in that moment, something stirred inside of him. Jamal's optimism, though sometimes naive, had always been a source of strength. And maybe, just maybe, it could be enough to help him fight back. "All right," Marcus said, his voice quieter than usual. "Let's go." Later that afternoon, the two of them sat at a table in the corner of the library, surrounded by textbooks and notebooks. The library was one of the few places that gave Marcus a sense of peace. It was quiet, and the smell of old books seemed to calm his restless mind. But even here, the pressure still loomed over him. "I'm telling you, Marcus," Jamal said, flipping through a page in his own textbook. "You're overthinking this. Just take it one step at a time. Focus on the small wins." Marcus nodded, but his eyes remained on the pages of his own book. The numbers and equations seemed to dance in front of him, mocking him. The more he looked at them, the more they made no sense. "All right," Marcus muttered, running his fingers through his hair. "I'll try. But it's hard, Jamal. I can't seem to make it click." Jamal leaned back in his chair, giving Marcus a look. "You're a genius, man. You just need to stop doubting yourself." Marcus's gaze flicked to the stack of papers on the table. He thought about the bet, about Professor Thompson's words. He didn't want to fail. He couldn't. The next few hours passed in a blur of numbers and equations. Marcus tried to focus, tried to push through the confusion. But with every step forward, it felt like 2 steps back. Each time he thought he understood something, the doubt crept back in. What if he wasn't smart enough? What if Jamal was wrong? It wasn't until they were about to leave that Marcus had a breakthrough. He had been struggling with an algebraic equation, the same one that had made him feel like a failure in class. But then, suddenly, it clicked. He sat up straight, staring at the solution. For the first time in days, he smiled. "I did it," he whispered, more to himself than to Jamal. Jamal looked up from his own textbook, surprised. "What? You actually got it?" Marcus nodded, his heart racing. It wasn't much, but it was enough to reignite something in him. "Yeah," Marcus said, more confidently this time. "I think I can do this after all." Marcus woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in weeks, the weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. The breakthrough from last night, solving that impossible algebra problem, had sparked something inside him. It wasn't just a small victory, it was a sign. Maybe, just maybe, he was capable of more than he thought. As he walked through the school halls that morning, Marcus felt different. It wasn't a huge change, just a small shift in his posture, a slight spring in his step, but it was enough. He had something to prove now, not just to Professor Thompson, but to himself. When he walked into class that morning, he was greeted with the usual stares and whispers. Professor Thompson was already at the front, scrawling equations on the board with his usual intensity. But this time, Marcus wasn't intimidated. This time, he was ready. Professor Thompson glanced at the class and gave a brief, sarcastic smile. Well, well. If it isn't the student who's destined to fail. I hope you've all studied for today's quiz. I know I'm not expecting much from Mr. Johnson, though. The students chuckled at the professor's jab, and Marcus could feel their eyes on him. But he stood tall, clenching his jaw, refusing to let their expectations define him. He wasn't going to back down. Not today. The quiz was a blur of numbers and equations, but Marcus found himself navigating through it with a surprising sense of ease. He had studied hard the night before, and while it still wasn't perfect, he could feel himself improving. Every question he answered correctly was a small victory, proof that he was capable of more than the professor and everyone else gave him credit for. When the quiz ended, Marcus took a deep breath, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. The moment the bell rang and class dismissed, Jamal was at his side. "Dude, I saw you working through those equations like you were born to do it," Jamal said with a grin. That was some next-level stuff. Marcus chuckled, though his heart was still pounding. It wasn't perfect, but yeah, I guess I'm getting better. You're killing it, man, Jamal replied, slinging an arm around Marcus's shoulders. Don't let Thompson get into your head. You've got this. Marcus wasn't so sure, but he appreciated the sentiment. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was fighting back, like he was making progress. That afternoon, Marcus was walking to his next class when he ran into an unexpected face. It was Mia, one of his classmates from another subject. She was always friendly, but Marcus had never paid much attention to her before. Today, however, she seemed different. "Hey, Marcus," she greeted him with a warm smile. "You did great on that quiz today." Marcus blinked in surprise. "You think so? I thought I messed up a couple of the questions." "No way," Mia replied, shaking her head. "You were the only one in class who actually seemed like you knew what you were doing. Professor Thompson's just been on your case because he doesn't like people challenging him. But I've seen you work, Marcus. You're really smart. Don't let him get to you." For a moment, Marcus didn't know what to say. He was used to Jamal's encouragement, but hearing it from someone else, someone outside of his inner circle, made it feel different. Validated. "Thanks," he said quietly, his throat a little tight. "That means a lot." Mia smiled again. "Don't mention it. You've got a lot of potential. You just need to believe in it." With that, she walked away, leaving Marcus standing there, feeling both humbled and confused. Could it really be that simple? Could he just believe in himself and suddenly everything would fall into place? Marcus shook his head, trying to shake off the doubt. He had made it this far, hadn't he? He had managed to push through when everything seemed impossible. So why not keep going? That night, Marcus sat at his desk, determined to keep his momentum going. The quiet hum of the apartment felt familiar and comforting, and as he opened his algebra textbook, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. He wasn't thinking about the professor's bet anymore, not the way he had at the beginning. He was thinking about the challenge ahead, the challenge of mastering the material, of proving to himself that he wasn't just a kid from a rough neighborhood who would never amount to anything. For the first time, Marcus realized that he wasn't fighting against his classmates, against the world, or even against Professor Thompson. He was fighting against himself, his own doubts, his own insecurities. The hours passed quickly, and Marcus lost track of time as he worked through problem after problem. Each one became easier, more familiar, like he was finally unlocking a door that had been closed for so long. By the time his mom came home from her shift, Marcus had finished most of the problems in the chapter, and he felt a rare sense of satisfaction. His mom noticed the change in him immediately. "You're up late, Marcus," she said, hanging her coat by the door. "Everything okay?" Marcus smiled, a little more genuinely than he had in a while. "Yeah, just studying. Got a lot to catch up on." She raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you're not overdoing it? I know you've been under a lot of stress lately." "I'm fine, Mom," Marcus replied, though the truth was, he felt more energized than he had in weeks. "I'm making progress. I think I can really do this." His mom's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "I believe in you, Marcus. I always have." The simple words from his mom warmed his heart. For so long, he had focused on the negativity around him, on the doubts from others, on the constant reminders of his struggles. But in that moment, he realized that there were people in his life who believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. As he sat back down at his desk, ready to continue his work, Marcus felt a shift within him. He wasn't just doing this for himself anymore. He was doing it for everyone who had ever supported him, his mom, Jamal, Mia, and even the silent whispers of encouragement that he didn't always hear. He wasn't going to let Professor Thompson's bet define him. He was going to prove them all wrong. The following week, Marcus walked into class with a newfound sense of confidence. The quiz results were handed back, and as soon as Marcus saw his grade, he couldn't help but smile. It wasn't a perfect score, but it was the best he had ever done. Professor Thompson didn't say much about it, just gave him a cold glance as he handed back the papers, but Marcus didn't care. He was done waiting for validation from people who doubted him. He had learned something far more important. He could succeed, on his own terms. And that was just the beginning. As the weeks wore on, Marcus began to notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere around him. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. It wasn't the kind of change that hit you all at once. But if you were paying attention, you could feel it. The tension in his relationship with Professor Thompson, the quiet murmur of doubt from his classmates, it was all slowly beginning to erode, replaced by something else. Something stronger. Marcus still wasn't the top student in the class, he wasn't aiming to be. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid to ask questions, to challenge his thinking, and most importantly, he wasn't afraid to make mistakes. In fact, he started to embrace them as opportunities to learn, rather than as signs of failure. By the end of the third week, Marcus had finished several major assignments with decent grades, and for the first time, he could feel a sense of confidence growing within him. But it wasn't just the grades that mattered, it was the way his mind was beginning to work. He was starting to think differently, to solve problems in ways he never thought possible. It was like a switch had been flipped. Still, there was something gnawing at him. A quiet voice in the back of his head that wouldn't let him forget about the professor's bet. Despite his progress, despite the small victories, Marcus knew that the true test was still ahead. He would have to face Thompson. The tipping point came a few days after an intense lecture on quadratic equations. Professor Thompson had called on Marcus yet again, and as usual, it felt like the entire room was waiting for him to mess up. "Marcus," Thompson's voice rang out, and Marcus felt the familiar knot of tension in his stomach. "Can you show the class how you would solve this?" The board was filled with an intimidating set of equations, each more complicated than the last. The murmurs of the class faded into silence as Marcus stood up, his mind racing. He had been practicing, working through problems late into the night, but this was different. This was the moment he had been dreading, the moment where he would either prove everyone right or prove them wrong. The entire room was watching him. The weight of their gazes felt like an anchor pulling him down, but he had come too far to turn back now. Marcus walked to the board, his hand shaking slightly as he took the marker. His eyes scanned the equations, and for a brief moment, the numbers blurred. But then, something clicked. It was like a burst of clarity, a flood of understanding that suddenly made the whole problem seem simple. He started writing, methodically moving from one step to the next. His hand was steady now, each stroke of the marker as confident as the last. The class remained silent, and even Professor Thompson seemed taken aback as Marcus worked through the problem with surprising ease. When Marcus finished, he stepped back from the board and turned to face the class. The room was still as death. Thompson stared at the solution, his jaw clenched. He didn't say anything right away, and for a moment, Marcus wondered if he had done something wrong. But then, Thompson slowly nodded, a thin smile pulling at the corners of his lips. Well, he said, his voice colder than usual. I guess I was wrong. You might just have some potential after all. The words felt like a slap in the face. Might just? Marcus thought to himself, anger bubbling up from within. Thompson's tone was sharp, dismissive as always, but something had changed. The professor had expected Marcus to fail, expected him to stumble, and when he didn't, it threw him off. But it wasn't the professor's approval that Marcus cared about anymore. It was the approval he had given himself. Thank you, Marcus said, keeping his voice steady, even though he felt a mix of pride and frustration rising within him. He wasn't going to let Thompson's backhanded compliment define him. As the days passed, Marcus started to notice other changes, too. His classmates, who had once looked at him with skepticism, were beginning to treat him with a new respect. It wasn't anything overt or dramatic, just subtle shifts in their behavior. A nod of acknowledgement here, a quiet compliment there. Jamal had always believed in him, but now, it seemed like more people were starting to come around. One afternoon, as Marcus and Jamal were sitting in the cafeteria, Mia walked up to their table. You did awesome today in class, she said, smiling brightly. I'm impressed. Thompson didn't even know what hit him, huh? Marcus smiled back, but there was a part of him that felt a little strange, like all this attention was a little too much. He was used to being invisible, used to slipping through the cracks, not standing out. Thanks, he said, though his mind was still spinning from the earlier class. Jamal grinned. Told you you got this, man. Mia pulled up a chair and sat down next to them. You know, she said, I've been talking to some people in the department. They're really starting to notice you. Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised. Really? Yeah, she said. I think you could make a real name for yourself here. People are starting to recognize your potential, Marcus. You're not just the kid who's struggling anymore. For a brief moment, Marcus wasn't sure how to respond. All his life, he had been told that he wasn't good enough, that he'd never measure up. But now, here was Mia, telling him that he was more than just a struggling student. That he had the potential to be someone important. I don't know, Marcus muttered, unsure of how to process it all. It's just. I'm not used to it. Mia smiled warmly. I get it. But you're not alone in this, Marcus. And you don't have to do it all by yourself. You have people in your corner now. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt a sense of belonging. He had spent so long feeling isolated, trapped in a world where everyone expected him to fail. But maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change. The days after that conversation felt like a turning point. Marcus wasn't just working through the material anymore. He was owning it. Every class, every assignment, every interaction felt like a chance to prove something, not to anyone else, but to himself. By the end of the semester, Marcus had not only passed the class, but he had done so with a level of competence and confidence that surprised even him. The bet that had once hung over him like a dark cloud no longer mattered. He had come out on top, not because of the professor's bet, but because he had refused to be defined by anyone else's expectations. But Marcus knew this was just the beginning. The journey wasn't over. There were still more challenges to face, more barriers to break down. But as he walked out of the classroom that day, with Jamal by his side, Marcus finally understood something crucial. It wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about proving himself right. And that, he realized, was the real victory. The break between semesters arrived sooner than Marcus expected, but as the last bell rang, signaling the end of finals week, he couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The sense of victory he'd had when he passed Thompson's class was still fresh, but the reality of what was next in his life was beginning to set in. Where did he go from here? How could he keep the momentum going? Marcus decided he needed a change of scenery, so he headed over to Jamal's place that afternoon. Jamal had always been his anchor, the one person who believed in him when no one else did. And right now, Marcus needed that more than ever. Jamal's apartment was always filled with the buzz of music and good vibes. The two of them sat on the couch, catching up on the break. Jamal, as usual, was talking about his latest hustle, selling mixtapes, helping his cousins with their latest tech startup ideas, and just trying to get by. So, how does it feel to have school behind you for a bit? Jamal asked, tossing a bag of chips between them. Marcus leaned back and sighed. Weird. I mean, I'm happy I passed, but I can't stop thinking about what's next. Thompson's still out there. I still have to prove myself to people. Jamal raised an eyebrow. You already did, man. You beat him at his own game. And not only that, people are starting to notice. You've already gone further than anyone expected. Yeah, but that's just one class, Marcus muttered, feeling the weight of doubt creeping back in. It doesn't mean I can keep this up. Jamal sat up straight, giving him a serious look. You've been doubting yourself since day one. But look at you now, Marcus. You're making strides. Don't let the pressure mess with your head. You're on the right path. Marcus stared out the window, watching the busy streets outside. He didn't want to admit it, but Jamal was right. The journey had only just begun, and no matter how much he questioned himself, he couldn't run from the reality of his potential. So what now? Marcus asked, turning to face his best friend. How do I keep going? Jamal grinned and grabbed his phone, typing something quickly before showing it to Marcus. Here. I've got something for you. It's an invite to a summer mentorship program at this tech firm I know. I heard they're looking for people with real potential. This could be the break you're looking for. Marcus frowned slightly, skeptical. A tech firm? I mean, I don't really know anything about tech. I barely passed algebra last semester. That's the point, Jamal said with a smirk. They don't want someone who already knows everything. They want someone with the hunger to learn, someone who's willing to push past their limits. And that sounds like you, bro. Marcus took the phone from Jamal's hands, staring at the email invite on the screen. It felt like too much, too soon, but there was something in Jamal's eyes, something that said he believed in him more than Marcus believed in himself. All right, I'll think about it, Marcus said, though a part of him felt both nervous and excited. But what if I fail? What if I'm not good enough for something like that? Jamal shrugged. Failure's just part of the game, man. You never know what could happen unless you take the shot. After that conversation, Marcus couldn't shake the idea of the mentorship program. For the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of excitement. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the opportunity that would finally help him prove to everyone, especially to himself, that he wasn't just a product of his circumstances. A few days later, Marcus found himself sitting in front of his computer, staring at the application form for the mentorship program. He had filled out the basic information, but when it came time to write his personal statement, he froze. What did he even say? How could he explain the roller coaster of self-doubt, the years of struggling in school, the constant feeling that he was never going to make it? Could he even articulate the breakthrough moments, the way his whole perspective had changed after that class with Professor Thompson? Marcus took a deep breath and began to type, letting his thoughts flow freely. I've spent my life believing I wasn't good enough. My grades, my background, everything told me that I was never going to make it. But recently, something changed. I realized that the only person who can stop me from succeeding is myself. I might not know everything yet, but I'm hungry to learn. I'm ready to push myself further than I ever have before. And I believe this mentorship program is the opportunity that can help me get there. When he finished, he read it over a few times, not fully convinced. But it was honest, and that was all he could give. He clicked submit and sat back in his chair, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. What had he just done? He had just taken a huge leap, and though the fear was still there was something else too. A sense of hope. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Marcus spent his days working part-time at a local grocery store, trying to save up for college applications, and his nights buried in books. The summer mentorship program was always at the back of his mind, but he pushed it out of his thoughts, not wanting to get his hopes up too high. But then, one warm afternoon in late June, Marcus received an email with the subject line, "Congratulations, Marcus. You've been selected for our summer mentorship program." He read it twice to make sure it was real, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for had arrived. The first day of the mentorship program was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. The tech firm's sleek, modern building felt intimidating at first, with its glass walls and polished floors, but as soon as Marcus walked into the lobby, he was greeted by friendly faces and a welcoming atmosphere. The program coordinator, Sarah, was a no-nonsense woman in her 30s with short, curly hair and an easy smile. She immediately made Marcus feel at ease. "We're excited to have you here, Marcus," Sarah said, shaking his hand. "This program is about learning, growing, and pushing your boundaries. We believe in giving you the tools to succeed, and we're here to support you every step of the way." Marcus nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness bubbling up inside him. This was his chance, his real chance. For the next few weeks, Marcus threw himself into the program with everything he had. The work was hard, and at times, overwhelming. There were long days of coding, debugging, and problem-solving, all while learning new skills that were completely outside of his comfort zone. But every time he struggled, he remembered the feeling of solving that algebra problem in Professor Thompson's class, the small victory that had set him on this path. The mentorship program wasn't just about learning tech skills, it was about learning how to think differently, how to tackle problems with creativity and resilience. And little by little, Marcus started to see the bigger picture. He wasn't just learning about technology, he was learning about himself. As the program came to a close, Sarah pulled Marcus aside for a one-on-one conversation. "You've done really well, Marcus," she said, her eyes warm with pride. "I've seen you grow more in these few weeks than I think you even realize. And I have no doubt that you've got a bright future ahead of you." Marcus didn't know what to say. It felt surreal to hear someone who wasn't his mom or Jamal speak so highly of him. But as Sarah spoke, something clicked inside of him. She wasn't just complimenting his technical abilities, she was recognizing his drive, his determination, his ability to rise to the occasion. And for the first time, Marcus realized that he wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," Marcus said quietly, a new sense of certainty in his voice. Sarah smiled. "That's the spirit. And I have a feeling this is just the beginning for you." As Marcus left the tech firm that day, he felt the weight of his old doubts slipping away. He had come so far, and while there was still a long road ahead, he knew he was ready. The journey from that moment on would be his own to navigate. But now, he wasn't walking it alone. And that made all the difference. The weeks that followed Marcus's successful completion of the mentorship program were a whirlwind. With his newfound confidence and a stronger sense of purpose, he dove headfirst into every opportunity that came his way. The summer was now stretching out ahead of him, not as an uncertain void but as a canvas for everything he had learned. But as much as he felt he was on the right path, a constant nagging feeling lingered. Was he truly ready to take the next step? Marcus had always been his harshest critic. No matter how many small victories he celebrated, a deeper part of him still questioned whether he belonged in the world he was entering. Despite the progress he'd made, he couldn't ignore the feeling of impostor syndrome. Could he actually succeed in this new chapter? Was he just fooling himself into thinking he had a place in the competitive, high-pressure world of tech? His doubts continued to haunt him, especially when his thoughts returned to Professor Thompson. The professor's dismissive attitude, the bet he'd placed on Marcus's failure, had been a constant thorn in his side. Even though Marcus had proven his worth in the classroom, there was a part of him that still wanted to show Thompson just how wrong he had been. Not for revenge, but for validation. One evening, Marcus and Jamal were hanging out at the local park, taking a break from their respective busy lives. Jamal was leaning back on the park bench, his phone in hand as he scrolled through something. "Man, I gotta say, you're doing amazing," Jamal said, his eyes never leaving his phone screen. "The way you've changed. It's like a whole new Marcus. People are really starting to notice." Marcus smiled but didn't fully believe it. "I appreciate it, bro. But I don't know. I mean, I'm still working through it. I've got this stuff with the tech firm, but what if I don't cut it? What if I'm not good enough for real work, you know?" Jamal put his phone down and gave Marcus a serious look. "Bro, stop doubting yourself. You've already proven you can handle the pressure. You've been doing stuff that most people would quit on. You didn't give up when everyone said you couldn't. That right there proves you got what it takes." Marcus's gaze fell to the ground, the sound of the park bustling around them. "Maybe. But I'm still not sure. What if this whole thing is just a fluke? Like, what if I'm just fooling myself?" Jamal shook his head. "Look, don't let those thoughts take over. You're not fooling yourself. I see it. Everyone sees it. And remember, when you start doubting yourself, that's when you gotta remind yourself of all you've done so far. You're doing better than anyone thought possible." The words were comforting, but Marcus knew that the true test was still ahead. He had seen what Jamal could do. Jamal was always confident, always sure of himself. But Marcus? He was still trying to figure out if he could really step into the shoes of someone capable of greatness. The next morning, Marcus received an unexpected phone call that would change everything. It was a recruiter from one of the largest tech companies in the city, asking if he would be interested in an internship position. Marcus's mind raced as he processed the words. This wasn't just a regular gig, it was a golden opportunity. A chance to get his foot in the door of one of the most prestigious companies in the industry. His heart pounded in his chest as he responded to the recruiter's questions, trying to keep his voice steady. This was the moment that could set him up for a career, and yet all Marcus could think about was his past. The same doubts that had plagued him for years rushed back. Who was he to be offered such a position? What if he failed? After the call, Marcus sat still for a few moments, letting the weight of the offer sink in. He couldn't pass up this chance. Not after everything he had worked for. And yet, the fear that had always held him back still lingered. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he couldn't keep up with the expectations? A text popped up from Jamal, his message a short and simple one: "You got this. Don't let fear hold you back." Marcus stared at the screen, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel quite so alone in his struggles. Jamal had always been there for him, and maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe the fear was just a reminder that he was pushing himself to places he'd never imagined. The following weeks became a blur of preparation. Marcus spent hours revising his resume, perfecting his portfolio, and doing everything he could to get ready for the upcoming interview. As the days wore on, his anxiety grew, but so did his sense of determination. This was his shot, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. The interview day arrived. Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting his shirt and trying to calm his nerves. His reflection stared back at him, and for a moment, he hardly recognized the person looking back. He wasn't the kid who used to be afraid of everything. He wasn't the person who doubted his abilities at every turn. He was someone else now, someone who could succeed, someone who had the strength to move forward even when fear was telling him to stop. At the office, he was greeted by a team of professionals, their smiles warm but their demeanor serious. They led him through a series of interviews, each one more challenging than the last. But Marcus found his rhythm. He spoke confidently about his experiences during the mentorship program, about his growth as a learner, and about how much he had pushed himself to overcome obstacles. With every question he answered, he grew more and more certain that he was ready for this moment. At the end of the interview, the lead recruiter smiled at him, impressed by his responses and his ability to think on his feet. "You know, Marcus," the recruiter said, "we're really impressed with you. You've shown a lot of resilience and drive. We'd like to offer you the position." For a moment, Marcus was speechless. It felt like the room was spinning around him. He had done it. He had actually done it. The recruiter continued, "Your story really stands out. We think you have the potential to be a great asset to our team. Congratulations." Marcus smiled, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't believe it. This was it. He was in. When Marcus walked out of the office that afternoon, the world seemed to shift around him. He had done it. He had faced his fears, fought through his doubts, and come out on the other side stronger than ever. As he walked to the bus stop, he pulled out his phone and texted Jamal. "I got it. The internship. I'm in." Jamal's reply came almost instantly. "Told you. You're a beast." Marcus smiled, finally allowing himself to believe the words. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. And for the first time in a long time, he realized that everything he had dreamed of, everything he had worked for, was just the beginning. There was no limit to what he could do. The first day of Marcus's internship felt like a dream. As he walked into the sleek, modern office building, the gleaming glass walls and polished floors greeted him, feeling both intimidating and exciting. He had spent years doubting himself, but here he was, about to work for one of the most prestigious tech companies in the city. He couldn't help but marvel at how far he had come. The HR assistant greeted him with a warm smile. "Marcus, welcome. We're thrilled to have you on board. Here's your badge and a schedule for today. Your mentor, Daniel, will meet you in a moment." Daniel was a senior engineer, a confident man in his 30s who exuded a mix of kindness and professionalism. As they shook hands, Daniel gave him an easy smile, "Glad to have you, Marcus. I'm excited to see what you can bring to the table." Marcus tried to suppress the knot of anxiety that was building in his stomach. His mind was racing. Was he ready? Was this too much for him? He didn't have the experience of the other interns, and he knew his skills weren't as polished. Could he really keep up with the high-level engineers around him? Daniel led him through the office, introducing him to the team. The place was buzzing with energy, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. Everyone else seemed so confident, so comfortable in their roles. Meanwhile, Marcus felt like an outsider, a high school kid pretending to be part of the professional world. As the day progressed, his fears only grew. He was assigned to work on a project involving complex algorithms and code optimization, areas he hadn't yet mastered. He listened carefully as Daniel and other team members explained the task, but a deep sense of inadequacy gnawed at him. He could barely keep up with the technical jargon. His mind flashed back to the days when Professor Thompson had told him he would never make it. Maybe he was right. Maybe Marcus was out of his depth. At lunch, Marcus sat alone in the cafeteria, his meal untouched as he scrolled through his phone absent-mindedly. He tried to push away the feeling of isolation that was creeping in, but it was hard. He had spent so much time proving himself to others, but now, for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt like a fraud. He remembered Jamal's words, "You got this. Don't let fear hold you back." But it wasn't that simple. His mind was racing with the belief that everyone around him was just waiting for him to fail. The impostor syndrome was overwhelming, and the idea that he was pretending to be someone he wasn't felt suffocating. The next few days were a blur. Marcus worked through the tasks assigned to him, but the constant fear of being exposed as a fraud haunted him. Every time someone asked him a question about his work, he felt like he was on the verge of being found out. The anxiety kept building, and the weight of expectation from his mentor and teammates felt unbearable. On his fourth day, during a team meeting, Daniel asked Marcus to present a small update on the progress he had made. Marcus felt his heart race in his chest as he stood up, trying to control his shaking hands. He quickly went over his work, explaining his approach and what he had accomplished so far. He could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him, analyzing him. When he finished, there was a long pause before Daniel spoke up. "That's a solid start, Marcus," Daniel said with a smile. "It's clear you're putting in the effort, but there's a bit more refinement needed here. Let's work together to optimize your approach." The word stung. It wasn't the criticism itself, it was the reminder that he wasn't as capable as he wanted to believe. He had tried so hard to keep up with the others, but in that moment, all he could think was, "I'm not good enough." After the meeting, Marcus went back to his desk, his mind racing. His thoughts turned dark, and for the first time since he had joined the internship, he wanted to quit. The fear of failure felt like a heavy weight on his chest, and the idea of being exposed as not having what it took made him want to disappear. That evening, Marcus found himself once again sitting at the park, his favorite spot to clear his head. The cool breeze ruffled his hair as he stared up at the stars, feeling more lost than ever. He hadn't reached out to Jamal in days. He didn't want to burden him with his doubts, not when everything seemed to be falling apart. But as Marcus sat there, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Jamal. "What's going on? You've been quiet lately. Talk to me." For a moment, Marcus didn't know how to respond. He felt embarrassed, weak even, for struggling with something that should have been a victory. But as he read Jamal's message again, he realized that he couldn't face this alone. He needed someone to talk to. He quickly typed back. "I don't know, man. I feel like I'm failing. Like I don't belong there. I'm just pretending to be something I'm not, and I'm scared that they're going to figure it out." It didn't take long for Jamal's response to come. "First of all, stop tripping. You're not pretending. You're just learning. We all started somewhere, right? Don't let fear mess with you. You've got what it takes to make it, you just have to trust yourself." Marcus sighed and leaned back, staring at the dark sky. It was hard to shake the feeling that he was out of his depth, but Jamal's words echoed in his mind. Maybe it wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was about pushing through the doubt, even when it felt like the world was telling him he wasn't good enough. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work earlier than usual. He was determined to face the fear head-on. His confidence still felt shaky, but he knew he couldn't let the impostor syndrome win. Daniel approached him later that day and noticed the change in Marcus's demeanor. "Hey, you're looking more focused today. Everything okay?" Marcus nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yeah, just trying to take it one step at a time." Daniel smiled. "Good. That's the right attitude. The more you practice, the better you'll get. No one expects you to have all the answers right now. You've got potential, Marcus. We just need to help you tap into it." The words felt like a small victory. For the first time in a while, Marcus didn't feel like he was pretending. He was simply learning, growing, and that was enough. As the days passed, Marcus worked harder. He tackled each new challenge with more confidence, no longer consumed by the fear that he didn't belong. There were still moments of doubt, but he learned to push past them. The fear didn't go away, but it no longer controlled him. By the end of the internship, Marcus had gained more than just technical skills. He had learned how to trust himself, how to silence the voices of doubt, and how to embrace failure as part of the learning process. When he walked out of the office on his last day, Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment that he had never experienced before. He wasn't the same person who had walked in weeks ago. He had proven to himself that he belonged. And though he still had a long way to go, Marcus now knew that he was capable of achieving everything he had dreamed of, if he could just trust himself enough to keep moving forward. The journey was far from over, but Marcus finally felt ready for whatever came next. As the summer began to wind down, Marcus's internship came to a close. With a new sense of confidence and a handful of meaningful projects under his belt, he reflected on how far he had come. He had stepped into a world that once felt out of reach, and not only had he survived, but he had thrived. For the first time in years, Marcus felt like he was truly on the path to something bigger than himself. But as much as Marcus wanted to savor his success, he knew there was more to be done. He couldn't let his progress stop here. He had goals now, and he had learned that he could reach them, even when the odds seemed stacked against him. On his last day, Daniel pulled him aside before the end of the workday. "Marcus," he began, his tone serious, "I want to talk to you about something." Marcus's stomach fluttered. "What's up, Daniel?" Daniel paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I've been really impressed with the work you've done here, and I think you've got a real future in this field. I know you're still early in your career, but you've got something most people don't, a drive to learn, to improve, and to take on challenges. It's rare." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You really think that?" "I do," Daniel replied, giving him a reassuring smile. "And I want to offer you something. We have a position opening up soon for a junior engineer. I'd like you to consider applying when it does. I think you'd be a great fit for the role." Marcus felt a rush of emotion. A part of him wanted to jump up and hug Daniel, but he kept his cool. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He had proven himself, and now someone was offering him a chance to take the next step. But even as he was overwhelmed with gratitude, he couldn't ignore the familiar, creeping doubt. "Thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate that. But I've got to be honest. I'm not sure if I'm ready for something like that. I mean, there's so much I still don't know." "I don't want to let anyone down," Marcus said, his voice betraying his inner struggle. Daniel's eyes softened. "Marcus, the whole point of an entry-level position is that you're going to learn as you go. You won't have all the answers right away, that's how growth works. What matters is your willingness to take on challenges and keep learning. And from what I've seen, you've got that in spades." For a moment, Marcus just stared at him, the weight of the conversation settling in. Was this really the right next step? Could he handle it? The doubt was still there, deep inside, but he was starting to see the possibility that Daniel saw in him. "Thanks, Daniel. I'll definitely think about it," Marcus replied, his voice more confident than before. Daniel gave him a friendly pat on the back. "I'm serious, Marcus. You've got a future here if you want it. Don't sell yourself short." When Marcus left the office that day, he felt both elated and anxious. A real opportunity had just been handed to him on a silver platter, but with it came the same fear that had followed him for years, the fear of not being good enough. He didn't know if he was ready for such a big leap, but at the same time, he couldn't deny the possibility that it was the right move. That evening, he texted Jamal. "So, Daniel offered me a junior engineer position. I'm not sure if I'm ready for it yet." Jamal's response was immediate. "Bro, are you serious? Of course, you're ready. I told you before, you've got everything you need. Don't let fear hold you back. You've been working toward this moment your whole life. Now it's here." Marcus stared at the message for a while. Jamal's words echoed in his mind. Maybe Jamal was right. Maybe this was the next step in his journey, the thing he had been working toward all along. But as much as he tried to convince himself, self-doubt lingered in the back of his mind. Would he be able to handle the pressure? Was he truly capable of performing at the level expected of a junior engineer? And what if he messed up? The next morning, Marcus met up with his mom for breakfast. It had become a weekly ritual, a chance to catch up and unwind. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt so uncertain about his future, but as they sat down at the table, he couldn't keep it in any longer. "Mom, something big happened," he said, his voice hesitant. "Daniel offered me a position as a junior engineer. But I don't know if I'm ready. What if I can't live up to it?" His mom looked at him, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Marcus, I know you. You've been through so much to get here. You've worked harder than most people twice your age, and you've proven time and again that you're more than capable of handling whatever life throws at you. But what if I fail? What if I'm not good enough?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She reached across the table, placing a hand on his. "You don't fail by trying, Marcus. You fail when you don't try at all. Remember what you've already overcome. That's not something most people can say. You've got everything you need to succeed, just trust yourself." Her words brought a warmth to his chest. It was the kind of reassurance he had been craving. He still wasn't sure if he was ready to take the leap, but maybe it was time to stop holding himself back. Maybe it was time to step into the role he had worked so hard for. That afternoon, Marcus sat in front of his computer, contemplating the offer from Daniel. His heart was pounding, and the same self-doubt was still gnawing at the back of his mind. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was his moment. He had worked for years to get here. This wasn't just a fluke, it was the culmination of everything he had learned, all the hard work he had put in. Taking a deep breath, he opened his email and typed a response to Daniel. "I would love to accept the position and join the team as a junior engineer. Thank you so much for the opportunity." He hit send, and immediately, a sense of both fear and exhilaration washed over him. He had made his decision. Now, it was time to step forward, knowing that the only way to truly grow was to face the challenges head-on. Later that evening, as he sat with his family, he told them the news. His mom smiled, proud as always, and his little brother clapped his hands excitedly. "I knew you could do it, Marcus," his brother exclaimed, grinning ear to ear. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt a deep sense of peace. He had stepped into the unknown, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. The journey wasn't over, but Marcus now understood that the path forward wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about embracing it and learning from it. No matter what challenges awaited him, Marcus knew he could handle them. Because now, more than ever, he believed in himself. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Marcus had accepted the offer from Daniel and officially transitioned into his new role as a junior engineer. The excitement he initially felt had quickly given way to a steady undercurrent of anxiety. He had been in the office for several days now, sitting through long meetings, observing his colleagues as they worked on complex systems and codebases. The sheer scale of the work was overwhelming, and the impostor syndrome he had felt during his internship had returned in full force. This wasn't just a temporary project anymore. This was real life. This was his job. He was expected to perform, to produce results, and he couldn't afford to fall behind. The weight of those expectations weighed heavily on him. On his second week, Daniel stopped by his desk. "Hey, Marcus, how are you settling in? How's the new project going?" Marcus tried to smile, but it felt stiff. "It's good. I'm just getting the hang of things. There's a lot to learn, but I think I'm making progress." Daniel gave him a knowing nod. "Don't rush it. You're still learning the ropes. Just remember, it's okay to ask for help if you need it. You're not expected to know everything, especially not this early on." His words were reassuring, but they didn't completely ease Marcus's nerves. Every day, as he worked through the code and system designs, the fear that he wasn't good enough continued to lurk beneath the surface. Despite all the encouragement he had received, he couldn't help but feel like he was out of his depth. That evening, Marcus sat at his desk, looking at a piece of code that he just couldn't figure out. He had been at it for hours, and the deadline was fast approaching. His brain was fuzzy from overthinking, and frustration was building. What if I'm not cut out for this? He glanced at his phone and saw a message from Jamal. His friend had been a steady source of support over the past few months, and right now, Marcus needed that reassurance more than ever. You good? I know you've been working hard. Let me know if you need anything. Marcus stared at the message for a long time, considering whether he should admit how much he was struggling. He didn't want to seem weak, didn't want Jamal to think he couldn't handle it. But the truth was, Marcus was drowning in self-doubt. He felt like he was hanging on by a thread, and the constant pressure was wearing him down. He quickly typed back. I'm struggling a bit, to be honest. I don't know if I'm cut out for this. The work is way harder than I thought. I feel like I'm falling behind. It didn't take long for Jamal to reply. Bro, you're doing great. Trust me, it's normal to feel this way at first. I've been there too. The important thing is to keep pushing through, even when it feels impossible. You got this. Just take it one step at a time. Marcus took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair. It was comforting to hear Jamal's words, but the anxiety didn't completely disappear. Still, Jamal's encouragement gave him the boost he needed to keep going. After a few minutes, Marcus decided to reach out for help. He wasn't in this alone, and he didn't have to figure it all out by himself. The next morning, Marcus walked into the office with a sense of determination. He was going to ask for help. There was no shame in it, no reason to let pride stand in the way of his growth. He needed to make progress, and sometimes that meant relying on others. He found Daniel at his desk and approached him cautiously. Hey, Daniel. Do you have a minute? Daniel looked up, smiling. Of course. What's on your mind? I've been working on the project, but there's one part I'm really struggling with. I could use some guidance on it, Marcus admitted, feeling a bit vulnerable but also relieved to finally ask. Daniel raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. You know, Marcus, I really appreciate that you asked. Most people would have tried to muddle through on their own. I'm glad you're willing to learn. They sat down together, and Marcus explained the problem he was facing. Daniel patiently walked him through the logic behind the code, pointing out the areas where Marcus had gone wrong and offering suggestions on how to improve his approach. It wasn't just about the technical details, it was also about showing Marcus that there was nothing wrong with seeking help when needed. Daniel's support gave him a renewed sense of confidence. By the end of the week, Marcus had made significant progress on the project. The code that had once seemed insurmountable now felt more manageable, and he started to see patterns that he hadn't noticed before. Though the impostor syndrome still reared its head occasionally, he had learned an invaluable lesson: asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a step toward growth. That Friday, as Marcus prepared to leave the office, Daniel caught up with him again. Hey, Marcus, I wanted to check in with you before the weekend. How's everything going? Marcus smiled, more genuinely this time. It's going better. I feel like I'm finally getting the hang of it. Thanks again for the help earlier. I really appreciate it. Daniel clapped him on the back. No problem, anytime. You're doing great. Keep it up, and remember, you're not alone in this. We've all been in your shoes. As Marcus walked out of the building, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in a while, the uncertainty that had plagued him seemed a little less daunting. He knew there would be more tough days ahead, but he also knew he wasn't facing them alone. He had a team of people who believed in him, and he had learned to believe in himself, too. When he got home that evening, he sat down with his family, sharing the highs and lows of his week. His mom was beaming with pride, as always, and his brother was eager to hear every detail about Marcus's projects. For the first time in a while, Marcus didn't feel the pressure of being perfect. He had accepted that growth was a process, and it wasn't about avoiding mistakes, it was about learning from them. As the evening wore on, Marcus received a text from Jamal. Yo, I knew you had it in you. Keep pushing, bro. I'm proud of you." Marcus grinned, feeling a rush of gratitude for the friends and family who had supported him through every doubt and fear. He still had a long way to go, but now, he knew that he could do it. One step at a time. And so, with newfound determination, Marcus took a deep breath, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. He wasn't just going to survive in this world, he was going to thrive. The following weeks flew by. Marcus was in the office almost every day, working on the junior engineer position that he had fought so hard to land. He had moments where he felt confident and capable, only to be met with setbacks that made him question everything. There were days when the work felt rewarding, and then there were days where the mountain of knowledge seemed insurmountable, and he had to wonder how he could possibly keep up. However, one thing had changed since he first started: he was no longer alone in this journey. With Daniel's guidance, the support of his co-workers, and the occasional boost from Jamal, Marcus had learned to lean on others. But more than that, he had learned to rely on his own instincts, his own intelligence. He was gaining more confidence every day, even when he couldn't solve every problem right away. Then one afternoon, just as Marcus was deep in the middle of another coding challenge, he received a call from home. It was his mom. "Hey, Marcus, I've been meaning to ask you something," she began, her voice sounding more serious than usual. "Yeah, what's up?" Marcus replied, a little distracted, but curious. "It's about your cousin, Brandon. He's been getting into some trouble lately. You know how he's always been rebellious, right?" Marcus sighed, running a hand over his face. His cousin Brandon had always been the troublemaker in the family. Growing up, they had been close, but as they got older, Brandon's choices had taken a darker turn. He had been involved in small-time crimes, and every time Marcus thought he was on the right track, he found himself back in trouble. "I've heard some things," Marcus said cautiously. "Is he in trouble again?" "Yeah," his mom responded, her voice tinged with worry. "He's mixed up with the wrong crowd, and it's getting worse. He might be facing some serious consequences if he doesn't turn things around." Marcus was quiet for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He didn't know what he could do for Brandon. The family had tried to help him before, but Brandon seemed determined to make his own choices, even if they were the wrong ones. "Mom, is there anything I can do? Should I come home and talk to him?" Marcus asked, trying to make sense of the situation. "I don't know if he'd listen to you, Marcus. He's not the same kid you remember," his mom replied, a tinge of sadness in her voice. "But I think having someone he respects might help him see things differently. You've always been the smart one. I just wish he would listen." Marcus sat back in his chair, staring at the screen in front of him. A part of him knew that his cousin wasn't going to change overnight, but the thought of him continuing down a dangerous path gnawed at Marcus's heart. He had made it out of his own struggles, and now, Brandon was on the edge of making the same mistakes. He wasn't sure what he could do, but he knew that if he didn't try, he'd regret it. "Okay, I'll talk to him. I can't promise anything, but I'll try," Marcus said, his voice firm. "I appreciate it, Marcus," his mom said softly. "Just, be careful. I don't want you to get caught up in anything you don't need to." Marcus nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I will, Mom. I'll handle it." After hanging up, Marcus sat in silence for a few minutes, processing everything. He had his own life to focus on, his own career to build, but he couldn't ignore the call for help from his family. Maybe, just maybe, he could help Brandon change the course of his life, just like he had changed his own. The next weekend, Marcus drove back to his hometown, feeling the weight of the decision on his shoulders. The drive was quiet, with only the hum of the engine filling the space. As he neared his old neighborhood, memories flooded back. It had been a few years since he had been here regularly, but the familiar sights and sounds made him feel like he was stepping back in time. When he arrived at his mom's house, she greeted him with a warm hug. She was relieved to see him, but there was an edge of worry in her eyes. "I'm glad you're here, Marcus. I know Brandon will listen to you." He looks up to you. I'll do my best, Mom, Marcus said, giving her a reassuring smile, even though he wasn't sure what the conversation with Brandon would look like. Later that afternoon, after dinner, Marcus found Brandon sitting outside on the porch, his gaze distant. He looked older, harder than Marcus remembered, as if life had already started to take its toll. Brandon, Marcus called softly as he approached. Brandon looked up, startled at first, before a familiar, half-smile spread across his face. Marcus. Long time no see. Marcus sat down beside him, feeling the weight of their shared history. Yeah, man. It's been a while. There was an awkward pause between them, both unsure of how to begin the conversation. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. Mom's worried about you. She says you're getting into trouble. Brandon let out a humorless laugh. Trouble, huh? You know me, Marcus. I've always been in trouble. Just part of the package. You don't have to keep doing this, Brandon, Marcus said, his voice earnest. You've got the chance to change, to do something different. You don't have to throw your life away. Brandon's smile faded, and for a moment, Marcus could see the vulnerability in his eyes. I don't need your lecture, man. You've always been the good kid, the one who followed all the rules. This is just who I am. You wouldn't understand. I do understand, Marcus replied, his voice steady. I know what it's like to feel like you're stuck. To feel like no one's going to give you a shot. But I got out. I turned things around. And I know you can too. But you've got to make the choice to do it. Brandon was quiet for a moment, staring at the ground. Finally, he spoke. It's not that easy, Marcus. Life's not all about working hard and getting a job. There's stuff you don't understand. People like me, we don't get the same chances you do. Marcus nodded. He had heard those words before, and he understood the frustration behind them. I get it, Brandon. But that's exactly why you have to make the change now. It's not going to be easy, but nothing worth having ever is. There was another long silence. For a moment, Marcus wasn't sure if Brandon would ever really listen. But then, slowly, his cousin looked up, and something in his expression softened. I'll think about it, Brandon muttered, his tone quiet but not dismissive. Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need to change. Marcus's heart lifted slightly. It wasn't a promise, but it was a start. Maybe that was all he could hope for. As Marcus left his mom's house that evening, he felt a strange sense of hope. The conversation with Brandon hadn't been easy, and there were no guarantees, but he had planted a seed. Maybe, just maybe, his cousin would find his way out of the darkness. As he drove back to the city, Marcus thought about the parallels between himself and Brandon. He had faced his own struggles, his fears, his doubts, his obstacles, but he had overcome them, and now he was trying to help someone else do the same. It wasn't always clear how things would turn out, but Marcus had learned that the first step was always the hardest. He knew that change wasn't easy, and that it would take time. But as he looked out the window at the darkening sky, he couldn't help but feel that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. And no matter what, he wasn't going to give up on anyone, not even Brandon. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The week following his visit to his mom's house was filled with both moments of triumph and frustration. Marcus had tackled new challenges at work, which, at first, had seemed almost impossible to him. But with each passing day, he started to feel more capable. There were moments when he still doubted himself, but his newfound confidence had made a significant difference. He wasn't the same Marcus who had walked into the office a month ago, unsure of his place in the world. He had learned that growth was about persistence, about pushing through even when the going got tough. Despite his progress at work, his mind kept drifting back to Brandon. He hadn't heard much from him since that evening on the porch, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was hard to tell whether the conversation had made a difference, or if it had just been another one of those talks that would fade away over time. He wanted to believe that Brandon would turn things around, but deep down, he knew that the road to redemption was never easy. Still, Marcus had to focus on his career and the opportunities in front of him. He couldn't allow his cousin's struggles to hold him back. He had worked too hard to get here, and he couldn't afford to lose sight of the bigger picture. On Monday, Marcus arrived at the office early. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a soft glow over the rows of desks. The energy in the building was palpable, and he could feel the buzz of productivity in the air. It was going to be a good day. As Marcus settled into his workspace, he noticed Daniel approaching. "Hey, Marcus, got a minute?" Daniel asked, holding a folder in his hand. Of course, Marcus replied, standing up from his desk and following Daniel into a small conference room. Daniel handed him the folder, a smile playing on his lips. "I wanted to show you something. We've got a new project coming up, and I think it's a perfect fit for you. It's a bit outside your comfort zone, but I believe you're ready for it." Marcus opened the folder and skimmed through the documents. The project was an advanced system upgrade for one of the company's major clients, a massive logistics company. The scope of the project was ambitious, requiring not only the technical skills Marcus had been building but also a deep understanding of client management, timelines, and expectations. "Wow," Marcus said, feeling both excited and intimidated. "This sounds huge. I don't know if I'm ready for something like this." Daniel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I wouldn't offer it to you if I didn't think you were ready, Marcus. This is the kind of project that will push you to the next level. It's an opportunity to really prove what you can do. Plus, you'll have the support of the team along the way. We're all in this together." Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the offer. This was his chance to prove himself, to step up and show everyone, especially himself, that he had what it took. It was terrifying, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was exactly what he needed. "I'll do it," Marcus said, his voice firm. "I'm ready." Daniel smiled, clearly pleased. "That's the spirit. Let's make this happen." As the days passed, Marcus threw himself into the project with everything he had. He spent long hours in front of his computer, diving into complex coding tasks and familiarizing himself with the logistics systems. There were moments when he felt completely lost, unsure of how to navigate the massive scope of the project, but he pressed on. Each time he hit a roadblock, he sought help from his team members, and together, they found solutions. By the end of the week, Marcus had made significant progress. The sense of accomplishment he felt was indescribable. For the first time in a while, he felt like he was truly excelling at something. He wasn't just getting by, he was thriving. But as much as he was focused on the project, his thoughts continued to wander back to Brandon. Marcus had reached out to him several times over the past week, but his cousin had been distant, unresponsive. It was as if the conversation they had shared on the porch had meant nothing at all. Marcus couldn't understand why Brandon seemed unwilling to take the opportunity to change. Late one evening, Marcus found himself staring at his phone, trying to decide whether or not to send another message. He wanted to be there for his cousin, but he didn't know how many times he could reach out before he just had to let go. It was frustrating, watching someone he cared about slowly spiral downward, knowing that he couldn't fix it on his own. Just as he was about to put his phone down in frustration, a text came through from Jamal. "Yo, bro. You good? You've been quiet lately." Marcus smiled faintly, grateful for his friend's check-in. He typed back quickly. "Yeah, I'm good. Just, dealing with some stuff. Work's going well, but I've been thinking a lot about Brandon. It's tough, man. I don't know what to do." Jamal's response was quick. "I hear you. It's hard to watch someone you care about go down the wrong path. But you can't save him if he doesn't want to be saved. You're doing everything you can, Marcus. The rest is up to him. Marcus stared at the screen, his heart heavy. Jamal was right. There was only so much he could do. At some point, Brandon had to make the choice to change. It wasn't up to Marcus to fix everything. I know. Just hard to let go. Yeah, man. But you've got your own life to live. You're making moves. Don't forget that. Marcus sat back in his chair, letting Jamal's words sink in. He had been so focused on trying to help Brandon that he had forgotten about his own growth, his own journey. He had come so far in such a short time, and he couldn't afford to lose sight of his own dreams just because someone else was struggling. The next day at work, Marcus tackled the project with renewed energy. He couldn't control what happened with Brandon, but he could control his own actions. And right now, his focus had to be on proving to himself, and everyone else, that he had earned his place in this industry. By the end of the week, Marcus had made significant progress on the logistics project. His team was impressed with his work, and Daniel took a moment to pull him aside. "I've been watching you, Marcus," Daniel said with a grin. "You've really stepped up. Keep this up, and you'll be running projects like this on your own soon enough." Marcus couldn't help but feel a rush of pride at the praise. It was exactly what he needed to hear to push him even further. But despite his success at work, there was still a lingering feeling in the back of his mind. What was going to happen with Brandon? Could he find his way out of the trouble he was in, or was it too late? Marcus didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't control the outcome. He could only be there for his cousin, and hope that, one day, Brandon would find his own way back to the light. As the weekend approached, Marcus realized something important. He had to focus on his own path. It wasn't selfish, it was necessary. He was building something important, and he couldn't let anyone, no matter how much he loved them, derail that progress. The journey wasn't going to be easy, but Marcus was finally learning that sometimes, the hardest thing to do was to let go, and focus on the future. The following week felt like a turning point for Marcus. The long hours he'd been putting in at work began to pay off, and his confidence in his abilities grew. He could feel the difference in the way his colleagues treated him. There was a newfound respect in the way they communicated, a subtle acknowledgement that he had become an integral part of the team. Daniel had been right. The project was pushing him to new heights, and he was finally starting to believe in his potential. Still, as much as Marcus tried to focus on his career, the tension in his chest remained. His cousin Brandon had been distant, refusing his calls and not responding to texts. It was as if the conversation they'd had that evening was just another memory buried in the past, a fleeting moment that hadn't meant anything to Brandon. One evening after work, Marcus found himself alone in his apartment, staring at the screen of his phone. The notifications were endless, messages from his colleagues, updates on the logistics project, but it was one message that caught his eye. It was from his mom. "Marcus, I need you to come back home. Something's happened with Brandon. It's bad. Please." A cold shiver ran through him. His heart raced as he immediately dialed her number. "Mom. What happened? Is Brandon okay?" he asked, his voice tight with fear. "Marcus, he's been arrested," his mom replied, her voice strained. "He's in jail. I don't know what to do. He's not listening to anyone, and I'm scared for him. Please, Marcus, I need you." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. His mind scrambled to make sense of what his mom was saying. He had known Brandon was heading down a dangerous path, but hearing that his cousin had been arrested sent a wave of guilt crashing over him. Had he failed? Had he not done enough to pull him back? "I'm coming home. I'll be there as soon as I can," Marcus said, his voice steady even though his mind was reeling. The drive back to his hometown felt longer than it had the first time. Each mile seemed to stretch into eternity. His thoughts were consumed by Brandon, by the choices he had made, and by the broken promises he had left in his wake. Marcus couldn't help but wonder if he could have done more. If he had pushed harder, reached out more frequently, maybe things wouldn't have escalated this far. When Marcus arrived at his mom's house, he found her sitting on the couch, her hands clasped tightly together, her face drawn with worry. His heart ached at the sight of her. She had always been his rock, the one who held everything together, but now, she was fragile, consumed by her concern for Brandon. "Where is he?" Marcus asked, taking a seat beside her. "He's at the county jail," his mom replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "The charges are serious, Marcus. He's been involved in some things he shouldn't have. I don't know what to do." Marcus nodded, his mind already racing through the possibilities. He wasn't sure what he could do, but he couldn't just sit there and let his cousin's life spiral completely out of control. He had to act. The next morning, Marcus and his mom made their way to the county jail. As they approached the building, the gravity of the situation settled heavily on Marcus's shoulders. He had been here before, during a high school field trip, but this time it was different. This time, the person behind those bars was family. After going through the necessary steps to gain access, Marcus found himself standing on the other side of the glass, staring at Brandon. His cousin looked different, haggard, eyes hollow with regret, a shadow of the person Marcus had once known. The tough exterior was gone, replaced by a vulnerability Marcus had never seen before. "Brandon," Marcus said softly, leaning in closer to the glass. "I'm here. I came to see you." Brandon's gaze flickered with a mixture of surprise and something else, guilt, maybe. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, finally, he spoke. "I messed up, Marcus. I really messed up," Brandon said, his voice raw. "I don't know how I got here. I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I've just been so lost." Marcus's heart broke at the sight of his cousin, the boy who had once been full of life and potential, now reduced to this broken shell. "Brandon, it's not too late to change. You don't have to keep going down this path. You can turn things around, but you have to want it. You have to fight for it." Brandon shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "I don't know if I can fight anymore. I don't know if anyone can help me. I've made too many mistakes. I don't know how to get out of this." Marcus's voice grew firmer, more insistent. "You don't have to do it alone, Brandon. You've got me. You've got the family. We've all made mistakes, but that doesn't mean it's over. You can still change. But you have to take the first step. I can't do it for you, but I'll be here every step of the way." Brandon's face crumpled, and for a moment, Marcus wasn't sure if his cousin would hear him. But then, through the tears, Brandon nodded slowly. "I don't know how to start, Marcus. I don't know what to do." Marcus placed a hand on the glass, as if trying to bridge the distance between them. "We'll figure it out together. You're not alone, man. We're in this together." As Marcus left the jail that day, he felt a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty. Brandon had finally acknowledged his mistakes, but the road ahead would be anything but easy. Marcus knew this wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. There would be more challenges, more setbacks, but for the first time, he believed his cousin was willing to fight for his future. Marcus returned to the city that evening, his mind still preoccupied with Brandon's situation. It was hard to concentrate on anything else. But as the days passed, he began to refocus on his work. The logistics project was nearing completion, and Marcus was in the final stages of implementing the system upgrade. It was a monumental task, but he was determined to see it through. He couldn't afford to lose sight of his own progress, even as he helped Brandon navigate his way out of trouble. In the coming weeks, Marcus continued to reach out to Brandon, offering support and encouragement. The road was long and full of obstacles, but Marcus was committed to helping his cousin find a way out. It was a delicate balance, pushing Brandon to do the hard work while also giving him the space to grow. But with each passing day, Marcus grew more certain that change was possible. He had seen it in his own life, how far he had come, how much he had grown. And he knew that, as long as Brandon was willing to try, there was always hope. The ripple effect of Marcus's success in the workplace had extended beyond his professional life. He was starting to see the way his growth had impacted the people around him, his mom, his co-workers, and even Brandon. It was clear to him now that the journey was never just about one person's success, it was about lifting others along the way. And as Marcus stared at the reflection of the city lights in his apartment window that night, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The path ahead was still uncertain, but he was no longer afraid. He was ready to face whatever came next, both in his career and in his family. He had taken the first step toward his own future. And he wasn't going to stop now. It was a cold morning when Marcus received a call from Daniel that would push him to the brink of his limits. The logistics project that had consumed the past few weeks of his life was running into major issues. The timeline for the upgrade had been unexpectedly shortened, and there were complications with the system integration that none of the team members had anticipated. Marcus had already invested countless hours into this project, but now, the stakes were higher than ever. "Marcus, we need to meet," Daniel said, his voice tight with stress. "There's a serious problem with the client. We're going to have to make some tough calls today." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had known things weren't going to be easy, but he hadn't expected them to escalate so quickly. He grabbed his jacket and headed straight to the office, mentally preparing himself for whatever was coming next. The office was buzzing with activity when Marcus arrived. The tension in the air was palpable, and he could feel it weighing heavily on his chest as he entered the conference room. Daniel, along with a few other key members of the team, was already gathered around the table. "Marcus, good to see you," Daniel said, his usual confident tone now replaced with a hint of urgency. "We're behind schedule, and the client is breathing down our necks. They've asked for an additional feature we didn't plan for, and if we can't get this right, we're at risk of losing the contract. I'm not exaggerating when I say this could affect the entire department's future." Marcus swallowed hard, the pressure starting to sink in. The weight of the responsibility felt crushing, but he knew this was his moment. He had to prove he could handle it, no matter the cost. "Okay, let's do it," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "Tell me what needs to be done, and I'll figure it out." The team discussed the specifics of the issue, and Marcus's mind raced as he took in the details. They needed to revamp the system integration in a way that had never been done before. The tight deadline was only the beginning of the challenge. The client's expectations had been raised to an almost unmanageable level, and now, Marcus was at the center of it all. "We can't afford any mistakes," Daniel said. "This is make or break, Marcus. The pressure is on you." Marcus nodded. He could feel the weight of those words, but he refused to back down. He had come too far to crumble now. For the next several days, Marcus threw himself into the project with an intensity he had never known. He worked long hours, often staying late into the night, unable to think about anything else. The lines of code blurred together, and he lived on a steady diet of coffee and determination. His phone remained silent for the most part, with only a few texts from his mom and friends checking in on him. Even Jamal had sent him a few messages of encouragement, but Marcus had been too absorbed in his work to reply. The stress of the situation began to take a toll on him. He could feel the strain in his shoulders, the constant fatigue in his bones, and yet, there was a fire inside him pushing him forward. He couldn't afford to fail, not now. Not when everything was on the line. In the midst of this chaos, Marcus's thoughts turned to Brandon. He hadn't heard from him in days, and the guilt began to gnaw at him again. Despite all his progress, he still hadn't been able to truly reach his cousin. Every call, every text seemed to fall on deaf ears. Brandon was slipping further away, and Marcus was struggling to keep his own life from unraveling at the same time. One night, after an exhausting day of debugging, Marcus sat alone in his apartment, staring at his phone. He had a new message from his mom. "Brandon called. He wants to talk to you. He's finally ready to take the first step. Please call him." Marcus felt a rush of conflicting emotions. On one hand, he was relieved that Brandon had finally reached out. On the other hand, he couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. Was he ready to juggle everything at once? The weight of the project, his personal life, and now this responsibility toward Brandon. Taking a deep breath, Marcus dialed Brandon's number. The phone rang several times before Brandon picked up, his voice tentative. "Marcus?" "Yeah, it's me," Marcus replied. "How you doing?" "I don't know," Brandon said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. I feel like I'm losing everything. I don't know how to fix it." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the vulnerability in his cousin's words. It was raw, real. This was the first time Brandon had truly acknowledged his struggles in a way that wasn't defensive or dismissive. It was a sign, a breakthrough. "You don't have to do this alone, man," Marcus said, his voice gentle. "We'll figure this out together. You've got me. But you have to commit to it. You can't just keep running away." There was a long pause, and Marcus could almost hear Brandon thinking about what to say next. "I don't know if I'm ready," Brandon admitted. "But I want to try. I want to get out of this mess." Marcus felt a sense of relief wash over him, but there was still a lingering fear. Could Brandon truly change? Would he stick with it when things got tough? "I'll help you, but you have to be ready to work for it," Marcus said firmly. "No more running. We're in this, okay?" "Yeah, okay," Brandon said quietly. The conversation with Brandon left Marcus feeling both hopeful and exhausted. As much as he wanted to help, he knew the journey would be long and full of challenges. It wasn't going to be an easy fix. But for the first time in a while, Marcus had a glimmer of hope that Brandon could turn things around. The next day, Marcus was back at the office, pushing forward on the logistics project. The pressure was suffocating, but there was a part of him that had never been more motivated. For Brandon. For himself. For everything he had worked for. He couldn't afford to let anything slip. He had to succeed, no matter the cost. But as the deadline loomed closer and the stress continued to build, Marcus realized something important. It wasn't just about the project. It wasn't just about Brandon. It was about balance. Finding the strength to carry the weight of both was going to be a test of everything he had learned so far. The night before the final presentation to the client, Marcus found himself staring at his computer screen, exhausted, on the edge of burnout. But there was no turning back. He had come too far, and this project was too important to fail. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When he opened them, he glanced at his phone. Another message from his mom. "I'm proud of you, Marcus. You're doing the right thing. You're going to make it." A surge of warmth filled him. He wasn't alone in this. He had people who believed in him. And no matter how tough things got, he couldn't forget that. With renewed determination, Marcus dove back into the work. The pressure was immense, but for the first time in days, he felt like he could handle it. He wasn't just fighting for his career, he was fighting for something greater. Something that mattered. The next day, Marcus would give the presentation of a lifetime. It was now or never. And no matter what happened, he was ready. The morning of the big presentation, Marcus woke up earlier than usual, his mind already racing through the tasks ahead. He had barely slept the night before, his brain continuously going over the final details of the logistics project. The project was groundbreaking, something his company had never attempted before, but there was still a nagging feeling in his stomach. The pressure was immense. The client's expectations were sky high, and it felt like everything was riding on this one moment. But Marcus was determined. He had worked tirelessly, and this was the culmination of everything he had learned over the past months. He had grown both personally and professionally. The same Marcus who had once been uncertain about his place in the company was now standing on the edge of something monumental. He had proved himself to his colleagues, and now he was about to prove it to the client. As he dressed, Marcus couldn't help but think about the night before, when he had spoken to Brandon. It had been a conversation that gave him a sense of hope, even amidst the chaos of his professional life. Brandon had finally acknowledged his mistakes, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus believed there was a chance for his cousin to turn his life around. It wasn't going to be easy, but they would take it one step at a time. But today was about his own journey. He had to focus. He had to give everything he had. The office was buzzing with anticipation as Marcus walked in. His colleagues were already gathered in the conference room, running through last-minute preparations. Daniel was pacing, clearly on edge, but he gave Marcus a brief nod of acknowledgement as he entered. "You good?" Daniel asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "I'm good," Marcus replied, though he wasn't sure he believed it. He tried to steady his nerves, knowing full well that this presentation would be one of the most important moments of his career. The team took their places, and the client representatives began filing into the room. Marcus could feel the weight of their gaze as they settled into their seats. He had always been the underdog, the one who had to prove himself time and time again. Now, though, the tables had turned. He was no longer an outsider, he was the one with the answers. Daniel opened the presentation, outlining the basics of the logistics upgrade, before handing it over to Marcus. This was it. The moment of truth. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus began, his voice calm but firm. "I know we've all been working hard to get to this point, and I appreciate the opportunity to present the solution we've developed." As he spoke, Marcus felt the familiar tension creeping into his shoulders. The client representatives, for high-powered executives, sat at the table, their expressions unreadable. He knew they were scrutinizing every word, every movement. But he couldn't afford to let their gaze throw him off. He had practiced this over and over again, and now, it was time to deliver. Marcus clicked through the slides, explaining the technical aspects of the system upgrade, highlighting the key features that would make the logistics process more efficient. He felt himself gaining momentum as he spoke, the weight of the pressure slowly lifting as his confidence grew. The team was backing him up, nodding and chiming in with support when necessary. But just as Marcus felt himself settling into the rhythm of the presentation, one of the client representatives, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tone, spoke up. "This solution sounds promising," she said, "but can you guarantee it will work under real-world conditions? You're asking us to take a risk on an untested system. How can you assure us that this will succeed?" The room went silent. Marcus felt a bead of sweat form at his temple. This was the moment he had been preparing for, but it still caught him off guard. How could he convince them that their solution wasn't just a theory but a proven system that could handle the high demands of the real world? He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. "Great question," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We've tested the system extensively in controlled environments, and the results have exceeded our expectations. But more than that, we've worked directly with several partners who've already integrated portions of the system into their workflows. Their feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, and we've adjusted based on their real-world experience." Marcus paused for a moment, making eye contact with the client representative. "I understand that you're taking a risk, but I believe the reward far outweighs it. This solution isn't just a leap of faith, it's a calculated investment in the future of your operations." The woman nodded, her expression softening slightly. "I appreciate your honesty," she said, before turning to her colleagues. There was a quiet exchange between them, and Marcus could feel the tension slowly ease. He continued his presentation, delving into the finer details of the system's capabilities, demonstrating its potential with examples and data that spoke for themselves. The more he spoke, the more he felt the shift in the room. The client representatives were no longer just listening, they were engaging, asking questions, nodding in approval. By the time he finished, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had done it. The team had done it. The logistics system was not just a concept, it was a solution, ready for implementation. As the presentation wrapped up, Daniel stood and extended his hand to the client representatives. "Thank you all for your time. We're confident this partnership will lead to incredible success for your business. We'll be in touch soon with the next steps." The clients stood, offering their polite nods and handshakes, but Marcus could see the shift in their demeanor. They were satisfied. The decision was all but made. As they left the room, Marcus allowed himself a moment to breathe. His body, which had been wound tight throughout the entire presentation, now relaxed. It was over. He had succeeded. The team had succeeded. That night, as Marcus lay in bed, his mind replaying the events of the day, he received a text message from his mom. "Marcus, I'm so proud of you. I knew you could do it. We're all rooting for you." His heart swelled with gratitude. He thought back to the moment earlier that week when Brandon had called him, ready to take the first step toward change. The call had been the turning point for both of them. It had reminded Marcus that success wasn't just about professional achievements, it was about the people you fought for, the ones you lifted along the way. The logistics project had been a success, yes, but it was only one part of his journey. There was still much more ahead. He had his career, his family, and now, more than ever, he felt like he could balance them all. He wasn't just a genius in the boardroom, he was a support system, a mentor, a friend. The weight of everything he carried had never felt more manageable. And as the evening passed into night, Marcus knew one thing for sure, he was ready for whatever came next. No matter the pressure, no matter the obstacles. Because in the end, he wasn't just fighting for success, he was fighting for the people he loved, and that made all the difference. The days following the presentation were a blur of emails, follow-up meetings, and intense discussions with the team. The client had given their feedback almost immediately, and Marcus couldn't contain the thrill that surged through him when they confirmed they were moving forward with the project. It was official. The deal had been signed, and his team's system was going to be implemented at one of the largest logistics firms in the country. For Marcus, this was the moment he had been working toward since he first walked into the company. This project was his, and the success wasn't just a feather in his cap, it was proof of his growth, his perseverance, and his ability to lead when the stakes were high. But as he reveled in the achievement, a part of him felt a tug at his heart. The victory didn't feel as sweet when he thought about everything else that had been going on behind the scenes. Yes, he had succeeded professionally, but Brandon's struggle was still looming over him. The conversation they'd had days ago was a small step in the right direction, but Marcus knew it wasn't enough. His cousin needed more than just words. He needed a support system, and Marcus knew that it couldn't just come from their conversations alone. That night, Marcus decided to call Brandon again. He dialed his number, waiting for the ring to connect. After a few moments, Brandon picked up. "Hey, Marcus," Brandon's voice sounded tired, like he hadn't been sleeping much. "How's it going, man?" Marcus asked, his tone gentle. "I've been thinking about our conversation. I want you to know that I'm here for you, but I can't do this alone. If you really want to make a change, we need to work together on this." Brandon was silent for a moment. "I don't know, Marcus," he said, his voice cracking. "I've been trying, but it feels like everything's falling apart. I keep screwing up." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to remain calm and focused. "Look, Brandon, I'm not going to tell you it's going to be easy. It's not. But you're not alone. You have me, and you have the chance to turn things around. You just need to take the first step." Brandon's voice softened. "I know you're right. I've just been scared, I guess. Scared that I'll mess it all up again." "You're going to mess up," Marcus said, his voice firm yet understanding. "We all do. But that's not the point. The point is getting back up and trying again. Every time you fall, you get stronger. I'm with you every step of the way, but you have to be ready to put in the work." There was another pause, but this time, it wasn't filled with uncertainty. It was filled with a sense of resolve. "Okay. I'll try. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I'll try. Good, Marcus said. One step at a time, all right. The following days were filled with both triumph and tension. While the logistics project was moving forward smoothly, Marcus found himself stretched thin. The pressure to deliver was still very much alive, and he had to be involved in every aspect of the implementation process. There were meetings to attend, systems to oversee, and constant communication with the client to ensure that the project stayed on track. It was a good kind of busy, but it left little room for anything else. Despite his best efforts to stay focused, his mind kept drifting back to Brandon. He hadn't heard much from him after that phone call, and Marcus couldn't help but wonder whether his cousin was truly ready for the commitment he had promised. One evening, after another long day of work, Marcus decided to check in again. He called Brandon, and this time, the phone rang longer before he picked up. "Hey, Marcus," Brandon said, sounding more upbeat than before. "I've been meaning to call you back. Things have been, okay. Not perfect, but better." Marcus could hear the shift in his cousin's voice. There was still a long road ahead, but he wasn't giving up. And that, Marcus realized, was the most important part. "I'm glad to hear that," Marcus said, smiling to himself. "How's the job going? Are you still at the warehouse?" "Yeah, still there," Brandon replied. "But I've been talking to my manager about getting more responsibilities. I want to do more. I don't want to stay stuck." Marcus's heart lifted at hearing the determination in his cousin's voice. "That's exactly the mindset you need, Brandon. You're taking control of your future. Just keep pushing forward." "I'm trying, Marcus," Brandon said, a hint of gratitude in his voice. "And I really appreciate you being there for me. I'm still scared, but I think I can do it." Marcus felt a swell of pride for his cousin. "You've got this. Just remember, one step at a time." As the weeks passed, Marcus found himself more entrenched in his work than ever. The logistics system was now being rolled out, and he had to oversee its deployment, making sure everything went according to plan. But there was a change in Marcus. He wasn't just reacting to the demands of the job anymore, he was leading it. He was proactive, confident, and making decisions with an authority he hadn't known he was capable of. And then, one evening, Marcus received a call that would change everything. It was from Daniel. "Marcus, we need to talk," Daniel said, his voice filled with urgency. "The client is pushing for a faster timeline, and they want us to expand the scope of the project. They've offered us a significant bonus if we can meet their new demands. But it's going to mean additional work and a lot more pressure." Marcus paused, feeling the weight of the new challenge settling on his shoulders. It was exactly what he had been hoping for, an opportunity to prove himself even further. But it also came with a cost. The stakes had just been raised even higher. "I'll do it," Marcus said without hesitation. "We'll deliver. But we're going to need to bring in more resources. We can't do this alone." Daniel sounded relieved. "I knew you'd say that. Let's get the ball rolling." As Marcus hung up the phone, he realized that this was the moment that would define his future. He had already proven himself capable of handling pressure, but now, he was about to face a challenge that would stretch him beyond anything he had ever imagined. And yet, despite the rising stakes and the pressure mounting on all sides, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was where he was meant to be. This was his time to shine, not just for himself, but for the people who had always believed in him. His career, his family, and his relationships were all connected now in a way that was bigger than any one project or challenge. He was ready. As Marcus sat in his office the following week, poring over the additional plans for the logistics system, he felt the familiar weight of responsibility bearing down on him. The client had laid out new demands, higher expectations, tighter deadlines, and an expanded scope that added complexity to the project. This was not just about delivering a solution anymore, this was about proving that his team could handle anything thrown their way. But with these new demands came a fierce internal struggle. Marcus had always been someone who thrived under pressure, but even he had his limits. The constant rush of emails, meetings, and technical assessments was beginning to take its toll. He hadn't had a decent night's sleep in over a week. The last few days had felt like a blur, just one task bleeding into the next. But as exhausted as he was, there was a fire within him that wouldn't let him slow down. He stood up from his desk and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. It was late, and the skyline shimmered with the distant glow of streetlights. He'd come so far. He'd worked so hard for this moment. He couldn't afford to fail now. Yet, even with all his determination, something inside of him questioned whether he was taking on too much. The project was important, yes, but so was his family, and so was Brandon's recovery. Marcus couldn't help but feel the tightrope he was walking, the balancing act between being a good leader at work and being there for his cousin. It was a struggle that weighed on his mind constantly, especially as he had promised Brandon he would always be there for him. He couldn't afford to let his cousin down either. Just then, his phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a text from Daniel. "Marcus, we need to talk. Can you meet tomorrow morning?" The urgency in Daniel's message made Marcus's stomach tighten. It wasn't like Daniel to be this formal or cryptic. Marcus quickly typed back, agreeing to meet first thing in the morning. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the office early. He found Daniel already seated in the conference room, papers strewn across the table. Daniel looked as though he hadn't slept, his eyes bloodshot, and his posture stiff with stress. "Good morning," Marcus said, sitting down across from him. "What's going on? You look like you've been running on fumes." "I haven't been sleeping much," Daniel admitted, rubbing his temples. "And it's not just the project. We've got bigger problems than we thought." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice lowered. "The client. They've been asking for more and more, and I'm starting to think that they've underestimated the complexity of what we're doing. They want a faster timeline, and we're already stretched thin. I'm worried we might be biting off more than we can chew." Marcus's heart sank. He had known things were going to get tough, but this was a different level of pressure. "What's the alternative?" Marcus asked. "We can't back down now. We've committed." "I know," Daniel said, running his hands through his hair. "But if we push forward, there's a real risk of us burning out. And not just the team, if we fail to deliver, it could ruin everything we've worked for." Marcus could feel the weight of Daniel's words pressing down on him. It wasn't just the project at stake, it was their reputation, the livelihoods of everyone involved, and the trust they had worked so hard to build with the client. He exhaled slowly, gathering his thoughts. "So, what do we do?" "We need more resources," Daniel said bluntly. "We have to bring in extra help. There's no other way to meet these demands." Marcus nodded, already running through possible solutions in his mind. He couldn't do this alone. He couldn't risk the project failing because of pride or stubbornness. "All right," Marcus said. "We'll bring in more people. Let's start reaching out to our contacts and see what we can arrange. But I want us to keep the communication clear with the client. We need to make them understand that this level of demand requires flexibility on their part." Daniel gave a relieved sigh. "I'll start making calls." "Thanks, Marcus." Marcus stood up, trying to shake off the unease gnawing at him. "We've got this. We'll make it happen." The next few days were a whirlwind of hiring new contractors, bringing in temporary staff, and adjusting the timeline. The team worked tirelessly to meet the new demands, but the pressure never relented. Marcus found himself constantly moving between strategy meetings, overseeing the system's integration, and checking in with his team to make sure everything was on track. But through it all, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was missing. Brandon. As much as Marcus had tried to push thoughts of his cousin to the back of his mind, he knew that Brandon needed him now more than ever. His promise to be there for him had become even more urgent, and Marcus couldn't ignore the fact that Brandon's recovery had hit a rough patch. Though they had talked about progress, Marcus hadn't heard from him in a few days. His cousin was slipping again, and Marcus knew that if he didn't intervene, it could lead to disaster. That evening, as the office emptied and Marcus found himself alone at his desk, he made up his mind. He couldn't keep going without checking in with Brandon. He had to do it now. He quickly dialed Brandon's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Marcus hesitated before leaving a message. "Hey, Brandon. It's Marcus. Just checking in to see how things are going. I know you're trying, but I just want you to know I'm here for you, no matter what. Call me back when you get a chance." Marcus hung up the phone and stared at it for a moment. He was too wrapped up in his work, too caught in the whirlwind of deadlines and deliverables. But his family had always come first, and now, more than ever, Marcus needed to remember that. No matter how many meetings or crises he was dealing with, he couldn't neglect the people who mattered most. He stood up from his desk and grabbed his jacket. He was going to go see Brandon, whether he answered the phone or not. He needed to be there, to show up and remind his cousin that he wasn't alone in this. Marcus had come too far to let the things that truly mattered slip through his fingers. As he stepped into the cool night air, Marcus realized that this project, this massive undertaking, was only one part of his journey. There was so much more ahead. So many battles to fight, so many lives to touch. And with that thought, he knew he wasn't going to let anything, or anyone, slip away. Not now. Not ever. The drive to Brandon's place felt like it took forever. The city streets were alive with the usual hum of evening traffic, but Marcus couldn't focus on the noise around him. His mind kept drifting back to the weight of everything, his work, the client's ever-increasing demands, the team, and of course, Brandon. He had to be there for him. He knew that deep down. No matter how many projects, deadlines, or professional successes he had, his cousin was the one who had always been there for him when he needed someone most. Now it was his turn to return that favor. As Marcus pulled up to Brandon's building, he hesitated for a moment. His hand lingered on the steering wheel, unsure of what to expect. Was Brandon doing all right? Was he still struggling, or had he made progress? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but Marcus pushed it aside. He was here now, and that's all that mattered. He parked the car and made his way to the front door of the building, taking the elevator up to Brandon's floor. The familiar creak of the old elevator was a reminder of the years they'd spent in this very place, growing up together in this same neighborhood. The elevator doors opened, and Marcus walked down the hall to Brandon's apartment. He knocked softly on the door and waited. A few moments passed, and the door creaked open. Brandon stood there, looking disheveled but not as distant as Marcus had feared. His face lit up slightly when he saw Marcus. "Hey, man," Brandon said, his voice quiet but warm. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know," Marcus said, trying to sound casual as he stepped inside. "I just wanted to check on you. See how things are going." Brandon closed the door behind him, his eyes scanning Marcus for a moment. "I'm all right. Just, working through stuff, you know." Marcus could tell that the usual deflection was there. Brandon was trying to keep things together, but the signs of struggle were clear. "Brandon, listen," Marcus began, his voice softer than usual. "I know things haven't been easy. But I'm here, all right? I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to do this alone." Brandon let out a shaky breath, his shoulders slumping. "I just feel like I keep failing, Marcus. Every time I try to do something right, I mess it up." Marcus stepped closer, his hand resting on Brandon's shoulder. "You're not failing, man. You're fighting, and that's what matters. You don't get to give up, not now. You've got a whole future ahead of you. You've just got to keep taking it one step at a time." Brandon looked down, the frustration and pain evident in his eyes. "I don't know if I can do this anymore. It's too hard. I keep messing up at work, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of his cousin's words. It was hard to watch Brandon struggle, harder than he cared to admit. But he knew this was a crucial moment for them both. I know it's tough. But, hey, Marcus said, trying to lighten the mood, you've got me, right? And you've got a whole team behind you. You're not alone in this. Brandon's lips curled up slightly, a sign that he appreciated the sentiment. Yeah, but I feel like I'm always the one holding everyone back. That's not true, Marcus replied quickly. You're not holding anyone back. You're just learning. We all are. We make mistakes, but that doesn't define us. What defines us is how we get back up. I'm here to help you get back up, all right? Brandon looked up at him, his eyes filled with doubt but also a hint of hope. I don't know, Marcus. It's just so hard. I know, Marcus said, his voice soft. But we've got time, and I'm not going to leave your side. We'll figure it out together. For a moment, there was silence between them. The weight of their shared past hung in the air, a reminder of the years they'd spent growing up in the same place, dreaming of better days. Marcus knew this wasn't just about helping his cousin with his job. It was about giving him the confidence to believe in himself again. Finally, Brandon nodded slowly. All right. I'll try. But I need your help, Marcus. I don't want to mess this up again. Marcus smiled, feeling a surge of relief. You won't. Not this time. We'll take it slow, all right? One step at a time. Over the next few weeks, things began to shift. Marcus was able to balance his work and his commitment to Brandon, carving out time to check in with his cousin. Slowly but surely, Brandon started to show signs of improvement. He'd begun taking on more responsibilities at work, starting small but showing real initiative. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. That was enough. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself at a crossroads. The pressure from the client was still building, and the team was feeling it. But as much as he wanted to focus on the logistics project, he couldn't ignore the fact that his cousin was starting to stand on his own 2 feet again. It was the most rewarding feeling he'd experienced in a long time, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. One afternoon, as Marcus sat in a meeting with the client to finalize the next phase of the logistics system, his phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. Just wanted to say thanks, man. I'm doing better. I took on a new project at work today. It's a start, right? Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with pride. It was a start. And that's all they needed. He quickly typed back a response. That's amazing, Brandon. Keep it up. You've got this. And I'm always here if you need me. As the meeting continued around him, Marcus couldn't help but think that this, right here, was the real success, the journey he had been on, not just professionally, but personally. In helping Brandon find his way, Marcus had found his own sense of purpose again. He wasn't just a leader in his career, he was a leader in his family's life as well. The project would get done. They would meet the client's demands. But more importantly, Brandon was finding his strength again. And that was worth more than any deal or contract ever could be. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt truly content. Later that evening, Marcus received a call from Daniel. Hey, Marcus. The client's happy with our progress so far. We're on track for the new deadline. Marcus grinned. I knew we could do it. You've really turned things around, Marcus. This is big, Daniel added, his voice filled with admiration. We're just getting started, Marcus replied. We're going to finish this, and we're going to do it right. I couldn't do it without my team, and I wouldn't have come this far without support. That's the spirit, Daniel said. Let's finish strong. As Marcus hung up the phone, he knew that whatever came next, he was ready. The project, the family, the challenges, they were all interconnected. And he would face them head-on, just like he had always done. Because he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't doing this alone. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. The new team members had integrated smoothly into the logistics project, and the pace of work intensified. Marcus found himself juggling the demands of the client, guiding his team through the complexities of the system's development, and continuing to support Brandon through his recovery. It felt like a constant balancing act. One moment he was navigating a high-stakes client meeting, and the next, he was at Brandon's side, helping him plan out his next steps in his job search or providing encouragement when things seemed bleak. The pressure, while intense, didn't feel as overwhelming anymore. Perhaps it was because Marcus had found a rhythm. He was learning how to manage his time better, delegate tasks to his capable team, and keep the lines of communication open with everyone who mattered. Brandon, in particular, had made significant progress. He was showing up to work consistently, and his manager had even given him a new project to lead, something that Marcus had never imagined would happen so quickly. But while Marcus was encouraged by his cousin's progress, he knew the hard part wasn't over. The client's deadline was fast approaching, and the system still needed fine-tuning before it could be deployed. It was a race against time, and the stakes were higher than ever. But for the first time in a while, Marcus wasn't filled with dread or doubt. He felt ready for the challenge, as if all the work and all the sacrifices had led to this moment. One afternoon, as the team gathered around the conference table to review the latest updates on the system's implementation, Marcus noticed Daniel fidgeting with a pen. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone could feel that the project was on the cusp of something big, and the weight of the impending deadline hung over them like a storm cloud. "All right, team," Marcus said, standing at the head of the table. "We're almost there. But we need to make sure every detail is perfect. There's no room for error." Daniel spoke up, his voice tight. "We've got a few issues with the final testing phase. There are some compatibility problems with the software update we're running, and I'm not sure if we'll be able to fix them in time." The room fell silent. Marcus could feel the pressure building, but he didn't let it show. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the team. "Okay, what's the issue? Walk me through it." Daniel explained the problem in technical terms, but Marcus could hear the frustration in his voice. They had been working on this for months, and it seemed like a small issue could jeopardize the entire project. Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself of the importance of staying calm under pressure. This was the moment that would define the project's success. "Let's break it down," Marcus said, his voice steady. "If we can't resolve this in the next 48 hours, we need a backup plan. But we are not going to let this stop us." The team nodded, determined. Marcus could see the resolve in their eyes. They had come this far. They were too close to give up now. The next 2 days were a blur of late nights, last-minute troubleshooting, and countless cups of coffee. Marcus found himself in the thick of the testing phase, working side by side with his team to resolve the software issues. His mind raced as they pushed through each challenge, but he knew they were getting closer to the finish line. Each small victory felt like a step towards something bigger, something that would change everything for all of them. At one point, as the clock neared midnight, Marcus stepped outside for a breather. The cool night air felt refreshing against his skin. He pulled out his phone and checked his messages. Brandon had sent a text earlier that day, telling him that things were going well at work. Marcus smiled as he read the words. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. His cousin was finally starting to believe in himself again, and that was all that mattered. Marcus took a deep breath and typed back. "I'm proud of you, man. Keep it up. We're almost done here, and I can't wait to celebrate with you." As he sent the message, he realized that this project, this intense, stressful, life-changing project, wasn't just about the success of the business. It was about the journey. It was about the people he had met along the way, the challenges they had overcome, and the lessons they had learned together. By the time the deadline arrived, the system was ready. The software was running smoothly, the final tests were complete, and everything was in place for the big reveal. The team had worked tirelessly, and though they were all exhausted, there was a sense of pride in the air. Marcus looked around the office at his colleagues, seeing the satisfaction in their eyes. "We did it," Daniel said, a rare smile on his face. "I can't believe it, but we actually did it." Marcus smiled back, feeling a surge of pride. "We did it together. You guys crushed it." The day of the final presentation arrived, and Marcus stood before the client, presenting the finished product. The team had come together, each of them playing an integral part in the success of the project. As Marcus spoke confidently about the system's capabilities, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of accomplishment. This was more than just a business deal, it was proof that when people came together, they could accomplish anything. When the presentation concluded, the client stood and shook Marcus's hand. "This is impressive work," they said. "We're looking forward to rolling it out." Marcus felt the weight of the moment lift off his shoulders. He had done it. They had done it. And now it was time to celebrate. That evening, Marcus met up with Brandon. They grabbed a quick bite to eat at a local diner, and as they sat down to talk, Marcus couldn't help but notice the change in his cousin. Brandon was no longer the same person who had been lost and uncertain just a few weeks ago. He was standing tall, his confidence building with each passing day. "How's work going?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "It's going well," Brandon replied with a grin. "I've been taking on more responsibility, and my boss is starting to trust me with bigger projects. It's been a challenge, but I'm starting to feel like I'm getting the hang of it." Marcus smiled, feeling a wave of pride for his cousin. "I'm really proud of you, Brandon. You've come a long way." Brandon shrugged, his smile growing. "I couldn't have done it without you, man. You kept pushing me when I didn't think I could do it. And that meant everything." Marcus looked at him, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You've always had it in you, Brandon. You just needed to believe in yourself." As they finished their meal, Marcus felt a deep sense of peace. The pressure of the project, the stress of balancing work and family, all seemed to fade away. They had made it through the storm. And now, as he sat across from his cousin, he realized that this was the true reward, the bond they shared and the strength they had found in each other. For the first time in a long while, Marcus knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The victory of the project's successful launch was still fresh in Marcus's mind. The relief he felt when the client gave their final approval was indescribable, but that victory was also bittersweet. The days that followed were filled with celebrations, but as much as Marcus tried to focus on the accolades, his mind kept drifting. Things had changed, at work, with his cousin, and even within himself. The days had been long, filled with late nights at the office and early mornings trying to catch up on the personal aspects of his life that he'd neglected. Yet, now that the project was over, Marcus found himself staring at the horizon, wondering what was next. The world around him seemed quieter than it had in months, but there was still a feeling of restlessness lingering within him. His team had done an exceptional job, and the client was thrilled with the final product. But Marcus knew better than to rest on his laurels. This was just one chapter in a much larger story. As the dust settled and the celebrations began to wind down, he found himself thinking about what was ahead, both professionally and personally. A few days after the project was completed, Marcus made his way to Brandon's place. They hadn't had a chance to hang out much since the project ended, and Marcus was eager to see how his cousin was adjusting to his new role at work. When Brandon opened the door, there was a noticeable difference in his demeanor. His face was brighter, his posture straighter. It was clear that his confidence had grown over the last few weeks. "Hey, man," Marcus greeted, giving him a quick hug. "How's everything going?" "Good," Brandon replied, his smile genuine. "I'm actually feeling like I'm making progress. Work's been going great, and I'm starting to get more comfortable with the responsibilities they're giving me." "That's awesome to hear," Marcus said, genuinely happy for his cousin. "You've really turned things around. I'm proud of you, you know that." Brandon laughed softly. "It's been a lot of work, but yeah. I think I'm starting to believe in myself again. It's funny, you know. I never thought I'd get to this point. You've always had it in you, Marcus said, giving him a knowing look. Sometimes it just takes a little push. But you've done the hard part. Now it's just about keeping that momentum going. Brandon nodded, clearly more at ease. Yeah, I get that now. I've got a new project coming up, and I'm excited to see where it leads. I feel like I'm finally in the driver's seat again. Marcus smiled. It felt like a weight had been lifted, not just from his cousin but from himself as well. He had helped Brandon find his way, but it was Brandon who had made the decision to take charge of his own future. Marcus had no doubt that his cousin would continue to grow, both in his career and as a person. That evening, Marcus found himself walking along the quiet streets of their neighborhood, the cool breeze against his skin. It was hard to put into words what he was feeling. There was a sense of accomplishment, but also a gnawing sense that he was on the edge of something else, a new chapter, a new challenge. The world had been moving at such a fast pace lately that it was almost dizzying to think about what was coming next. Marcus had always been someone who thrived on change, on pushing the limits, on striving for something bigger. But after the project, after everything he had been through with Brandon, he began to realize something he hadn't before. It wasn't just about the next big project or the next milestone. It was about the people around him, the relationships that anchored him, and the way those connections shaped his journey. As much as he had focused on his career, Marcus knew that his true success wasn't measured in spreadsheets or deadlines. It was in the moments like these, sitting with Brandon, watching him succeed, and realizing that everything they had been through had led them both to a better place. A few days later, Marcus received an unexpected call from Daniel. "Hey, Marcus. You got a minute?" Daniel's voice was unusually serious. "Yeah, what's up?" Marcus replied, his curiosity piqued. "I just wanted to check in and say thanks for everything, man. You really pulled through on this project. Your leadership made all the difference," Daniel said, his voice sincere. "But I've been thinking about the future. We've got more big projects coming up, and I think it's time to start planning for the next phase of the company. I want you to be a bigger part of that." Marcus blinked, processing the words. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm offering you a leadership role, Marcus," Daniel said. "We're expanding, and we need someone who can take the reins and push us forward. You've got the vision, the skills, and the drive. I think you're the perfect person for the job." Marcus was silent for a moment, the weight of the offer settling in. It was a huge opportunity, one that could change everything. But for the first time, he hesitated. It wasn't that he didn't want the position, it was more about the bigger picture. He had spent so much of his life focused on his career, on climbing higher, achieving more, but now he found himself questioning if that was really what he wanted. The decision wasn't easy. There was a lot of potential, a lot of room to grow in this new role. But Marcus knew that the real test wasn't in the job itself, it was in how he balanced his professional ambitions with his personal life. He had learned the hard way that it was all about balance, about knowing what mattered most. A few days later, Marcus met with Brandon again. They sat at their usual diner, talking about life and everything in between. Marcus had made his decision, but he wasn't sure how to explain it. "So, I've been offered a big promotion at work," Marcus said, finally breaking the silence. Brandon looked up, surprised. "That's amazing, man. You're going to take it, right?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, contemplating his next words carefully. "I don't know, honestly. It's a huge step forward in my career, but I've been thinking a lot about what matters. I don't want to keep chasing something without considering what I'm really working for." Brandon studied him for a moment before speaking. "You've always been so focused on your career, Marcus. But I get what you're saying. You've been there for me, and I know how much you've given to everyone around you. Maybe it's time to take a step back and figure out what's next for you, what you really want." Marcus smiled, appreciating his cousin's insight. "You're right. It's not just about the promotion, or the project, or the money. It's about what I'm building, the people I'm building it with, and what I want my life to look like down the road. For the first time in months, Marcus felt a sense of clarity. The future was uncertain, but that was part of the journey. Whatever he chose to do next, he knew he couldn't do it alone. He had the support of his team, his family, and Brandon. And that, more than anything, was what made the journey worthwhile. As Marcus left the diner that evening, he felt a quiet confidence settle over him. The future wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace, with all its possibilities and uncertainties. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing for sure, he was ready to step into the unknown, knowing that whatever came next, he had the strength to face it. And most importantly, he had the people who mattered beside him, cheering him on every step of the way. With that thought, Marcus took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace with the journey ahead. The weeks that followed Marcus's conversation with Brandon felt like a turning point. Marcus had made the decision to take the promotion, not because it was the obvious next step, but because he had finally found a sense of balance within himself. He realized that growth wasn't just about moving up professionally, it was about creating the right environment for those around him to thrive as well. That meant being a better leader, a better friend, and a better cousin. It meant prioritizing what really mattered, building relationships, nurturing trust, and most importantly, finding joy in the journey, not just the destination. The day he accepted the leadership role felt surreal. The excitement was there, of course, but it was tempered by a deep sense of responsibility. He wasn't just taking on more work, he was becoming a mentor, a guide for those around him. He thought about Daniel's words when he offered him the position. "You've got the vision, Marcus," Daniel had said. "You know how to inspire and push people to do their best." It was a huge compliment, but Marcus knew it wasn't just his professional skills that had gotten him to this point, it was the personal growth, the lessons learned from the challenges he had faced, and the people who had helped him along the way. He had seen the struggles that Brandon had gone through, and he realized that his own path had been shaped by his support system just as much as by his ambitions. In the weeks that followed, Marcus threw himself into his new role. The transition was challenging, there were meetings to attend, decisions to make, and new responsibilities to shoulder. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, Marcus embraced it. He had learned how to manage stress, delegate tasks effectively, and maintain a clear vision, even when things seemed to be spiraling. His team respected him not just for his intelligence or his ability to lead, but for his openness, his authenticity, and his willingness to listen. He wasn't perfect, but he was always learning. And when he wasn't at work, Marcus found himself taking more time to connect with the people who had become his anchors. He spent more time with Brandon, who continued to thrive at his job, taking on new challenges and proving to himself that he was capable of so much more than he had ever thought. The two of them would often grab coffee and chat about life, work, and everything in between. Their bond had deepened in ways Marcus had never anticipated, and it was a constant reminder of the importance of family. One afternoon, after a particularly busy week at the office, Marcus decided to take a break and visit the park. It had become a bit of a tradition for him to go there when he needed to clear his mind, especially after a long stretch of stressful days. He found a quiet spot near the lake and sat down, watching the ducks glide across the water. It was peaceful, and for a moment, Marcus felt completely at ease. He allowed himself to reflect on everything that had brought him to this point, the late nights, the setbacks, the victories, and the lessons learned. As he sat there, he pulled out his phone and texted Brandon. "I'm really proud of you, man. You're crushing it. I'm lucky to have you in my life." The response came quickly. "I wouldn't be where I am without you. Thanks for always having my back." Marcus smiled as he read the message. For the first time in a long while, he felt content. Life wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges to face, but he had come so far. He had built something meaningful, not just a career, but relationships that made everything worth it. The road ahead was unknown, but that was part of the beauty of it. Whatever happened next, he knew that he had the strength to face it. And he knew that no matter what, he wasn't alone. A few months later, Marcus was sitting in his office, preparing for another big project launch. He had a team now that he trusted, and he had learned how to be a better leader, not just in terms of work, but in terms of supporting those around him. As he reviewed the project's details, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "Hey Marcus, can we talk?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. It wasn't like Daniel to reach out like this. He quickly texted back, "Of course. What's up?" A few minutes later, Daniel called. "Marcus, I've been thinking a lot about the direction we're going in," Daniel began. "I know you've taken on a lot of responsibility already, but there's something big I want to discuss with you. We've been growing fast, and I think it's time for a more permanent partnership, something where you and I are co-leading this company together." Marcus paused, stunned. The offer was a huge one, and it came with a new level of responsibility, but also a recognition of everything he had achieved so far. "Daniel, that's incredible," Marcus said, his mind racing. "I'm honored, but I need some time to think about it." Daniel chuckled on the other end of the line. "Take all the time you need, Marcus. But know that I believe in you, and I think together we can really make this company something extraordinary." Later that night, Marcus sat down with a glass of water in his hand, thinking about everything that had led up to this moment. A co-leadership role with Daniel. It was an enormous responsibility, and it would change everything. But the more Marcus thought about it, the more he realized that he had come full circle. The leadership lessons he had learned weren't just about running a company, they were about creating an environment where everyone could succeed. It wasn't about power, it was about people. He thought back to the times when he doubted himself, when he was overwhelmed by pressure, and when he felt like he didn't have the answers. But then, he thought of his cousin Brandon, who had once been lost and unsure, now thriving and confident. He thought of his team, the friends and colleagues who had become more than just work partners. And he realized that the most important thing wasn't about the titles, it was about the impact he could make. The decision wasn't easy, but it was clear to him now. He would accept the offer. Not because it was the next logical step in his career, but because it felt like the right step for the future he wanted to build, one where success wasn't just measured by financial gains, but by the lives he could touch and the people he could help grow. Marcus made the decision that night. He would call Daniel the next day to say yes. The next morning, as he dialed Daniel's number, Marcus smiled to himself. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in his life, he felt ready to embrace it, whatever it held. As the phone rang and Daniel picked up, Marcus felt a sense of calm wash over him. "Daniel," Marcus said, his voice steady but filled with resolve, "I'm in." And with that, a new chapter began. Not just for the company, but for Marcus, his team, and everyone who had believed in him. The journey wasn't over, it had only just begun. And as he hung up the phone, Marcus felt a sense of peace, knowing that whatever came next, he was ready to lead. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?